Hello?
Mumienko som foro, mumienko som, mumienko som, mumienko som foro, yare foro, reforo apera benetifi, mumienko som, mumienko som, mumienko som, mumienko som, mumienko som foro, erere intefi, inko som foro, inko som pere, inko som intefi, kukuneti fida suwe, chiri, 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 Mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro abutwa sini amoyere mumienko. Akene mutawane orende nemo na mumienko so, mumienko so, foro mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro irere imeki, inko so, foro, inko so, pere, inko so, imeki. Adisia mumienko sina yare para kwa koduha. Kukuneti fida suwe, chiri, 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 Mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, abutwa sini aboyere mumienko. Akene mudahone orende nemo na mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, ereme intefi, inko so, furo, inko so, pere, inko so, intefi. Adisia mumienko sina yere prara kwa koduwa. Mumienko so, furo, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro, yare foro, reforo apera benetifi, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro, erere intefi, inko so, foro, inko so, pere, inko so, intefi, kukuneti fida suwe, chiri, 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 Mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro, abutwa sini amoyere mumienko. Akene mutawane orende nemo na mumienko so, mumienko so, foro, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, foro, irere intefi, inko so, foro, inko so, pere, inko so, intefi. Adisia mumienko sina yare prara kwa koduha. Kukuneti fida suwe, chiri, 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 Mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, abutwa sini aboyere mumienko. Akene mudahone orende nemo na mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, mumienko so, mumienko so, mumienko so, furo, ereme intefi, inko so, furo, inko so, pere, inko so, intefi. Adisia mumienko sina yere prara kwa koduha. Modai suena bine, ilina suena, calzatini suena, dedica fuego, muere mi alma, llevo mose.
Half of my personality, half of what I am, half of my knowledge, the law, half of what I stand for in the law, attributable to the gentleman.
He will outsprit you, he will outwork you, and he will do what? He will outthink you.
In 1988, during the days of the movement for freedom and justice on campus, we were then students on campus. Now, there was a demonstration that was organized in town, if you remember. Now, on that day, we had left Lagos, and I'm sure that were senior members. So, I don't know how we managed to slip into Legon campus, but we found ourselves around Kwame Nkrumah Circle. And Uncle Shay emerged from nowhere, distributing the placards. And in fact, Sister Annette, of blessed memory, was at the forefront of this movement, and students, they were leading us, charging on the streets of Accra. That was the day I met Uncle Shay.
I think everyone in this room can attest to the fact that they could speak for eons about how incredible Uncle Shay is.
If you know Akoto Ampaw, you know that he's one of the most sensitive persons. Very easy to feel for the other person. Very easy to live for the other person. An extremely sensitive person who feels for others.
Shay is an individual like any one of us. A persona with a significant address. But this address is very peculiar because his GPS is humility. He has always esteemed others better than himself. And this humble feature has provided him with a much needed tonic to become a prodigy in academic legalism. I think he deserves an applause here. He is admired by all colleagues and adored by many, both male and female, even though the balance tilts towards the latter.
At AAPC, you are simply a teacher, one whose doors are perpetually open for discussions regardless of the subject, one who is always ready to read over every writing to provide guidance and clarify our thoughts. Uncle Shay, You are a personification of an individual wholly committed to his job by your sheer ethic, diligence, adeptness at research, and smooth operating skills in advocacy. Your concern for the welfare of the human race is exemplary, a lesson to us on humanity, politics, and the practice of law. It is not surprising that you are the pillar behind the Trades Union Congress and many other such organizations.
They say he was a great lawyer, but who am I to say? They say he was a wonderful elder brother and uncle, but who am I to say? It is even rumored that he was a great lover, but who am I to say? Some claim he was a good goalkeeper in his days at Legon, but who am I to say? Some harbored the hope that someday he would become social media literate, but who am I to say? And some even clung to the hope that he would someday discard his well-worn, cockatoo-looking lawyer's wig, memorably described by a Chief Justice as, quote, having lost his identity. But who am I to say? What I know and can say with full authority is that the man whose life and works we have the privilege and honor to memorialize this evening was a tireless advocate for democracy, justice, human rights, and the rule of law. A selfless champion of the welfare of the underprivileged, disadvantaged, and the voiceless. A tenacious promoter of all causes progressive, economic, social, and political. An incisive analyst of the African, Ghanaian political economy and development strategies. A wise and sagacious counselor, resolutely uninterested in material wealth, supremely courageous, and unwavering in his willingness to speak truth to power. Comrade lawyer Sheshe Anthony Akoto Ampaw, it is likely that in your absence, but always in your cherished memory, we shall occasionally gather to indulge in a feast of fufu and abenkwan, or some other deluxe United Nations soup, and wash it down with single malt whiskey and or cognac in the ambience of jazz and blues. It is especially in those moments we will sorely miss the unique blend of conviviality, joviality, levity, intense seriousness and reflection you brought to all our gatherings. Fare thee well, you great Ghanaian nationalist and patriot, dedicated Pan-Africanist, true humanist, and a dear, dear friend. Comrade lawyer Sheshe Anthony Akoto Ampaw, Deye.
Sheshe was a God talent given to all of us. He was a superstar. He played for, I would say first Sabaho, then Amalgamated Club, of which I was the assistant coach to Mr. J.K. Adwakwa. very talented player, very intelligent player, very courageous player. I would say the greatest thing I found about him was that he had a winning attitude in him. He was somebody who was very devotional. Anything that we taught, I was the coach of the football side, we would come back and practice and ask questions. He was a player who possessed the leadership qualities and was always interested in making sure that he encouraged his colleagues, to win. I would say it was a household name on the whole university campus. Students, workers, sellers, lecturers, and everybody admired the way he played. Sheshe played for the University of Ghana. He won a lot of awards. He played in friendly tournaments with Togo University, Ibadan University in Nigeria, Lagos University, and eventually played in the WAFU, West African University Games that was hosted in Cote d'Ivoire. He was very prominent and very intelligent person that, if you are talking about football, Sheshe is a name that will never be forgotten. I myself, when I was in Achimota School, I was called Morocco Jones. That was not the name my parents gave me. So it happened that when he came to Legon, Sabah, I think students like calling, he felt Akoto Ampaw maybe might have been a long name. And so something which could be attractive and catchy. And Sheshe was the chorus, which I believe that anyone who passed on the university campus between, the 70s and 80s, that chorus will still be sounding in their hearts today, because it's beautiful, it sounds nice. And can you imagine this name, Sheshe, dribbling a host of opponents and creating gap for others, or scoring a goal, and after scoring a goal, how people will run onto the field before FIFA brought the rules that we should not invade the field. You can imagine an university campus. So that's how the guy moved. And I believe academically too, he was sound. So in the law school, they remembered him. So here was the guy, always passing around, laughing and cheerful and carrying the tag, Sheshe. I would say it's a great loss to not to University of Ghana alone, but to the whole nation. Because what he purposed to do, he did it. And it's only, excuse me to say, it's only the blind man who says he's forgotten about Sheshe. That's the big name that we're mentioning for him. And I would say, for what the Lord has given unto us, we should thank the Lord, and we should thank his family for bringing him to the limelight and being somebody who was hardworking and very devotional to whatever he wanted to do, and very open to people who could assist him and in life. You look at him, he may have diverse views about him, but he was somebody who was very open and cheerful, and found himself in where he was before, the Lord took him away. So I would greatly say, may his soul rest in perfect peace.
Yeah. Kukuneti fida suwe chiri 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 Mumien koso furu abutwa sini aboyere mumien ajene mudahone orende nemo mumien koso furu mumien koso furu geremengete koso furu adisia mumien sina yere prara kwa kodruwa
Somewhere.
versus law reform and justice for the poor and marginalized. To commemorate the first anniversary of his passing, we, his friends and comrades, are holding this public lecture on a theme and topic that occupied his attention and concern in these years of the Fourth Republic. We do honor to him to pursue these concerns which formed important parts of the principles and values that underpinned and defined our comradeship and friendship. Today, for the 9th time, Ghanaians are once again in the Fourth Republic gearing up to vote to elect a president and parliamentarians. And the major political parties and a couple of new entrants are haranguing the people for their votes. But what is the nature, character, and essential import of the democracy that was promised by the Fourth Republic? It is often said that there is a recession in the democracy we practice. Is it that there is a recession, or that actually what we are experiencing is but the manifestation of realities of a false start, or the consequence of fundamental flaws? When in an election campaign, political parties refuse to address major existential issues such as galamsey, because they fear to lose votes, or because their leaders and financiers are beneficiaries, we are compelled to ask, who do the parties represent? Votes or the voters? What do political parties stand for? Indeed, what is the meaning of the political ideas the principal actors have been trumpeting? Liberal democracy, social democracy. Do they practice these ideas? Two of the major values and principles very loudly propagated in the Fourth Republic are rule of law and accountability and transparency. How do these values manifest in governance, in public administration in the Fourth Republic? I'm sure we all have many questions about the state of democracy in the Fourth Republic. They certainly cannot be addressed in one public lecture. We certainly hope that the anniversary of our comrade's passing will stimulate continuous critical discussion and struggles to strive to promote the strengthening of democracy for the development, social, economic, and cultural progress for our country. To lead our discussion this morning, we present three intellectuals and activists in the broad movement for the promotion of democracy and rights. Our principal lecturer will be followed by two discussants, and I will introduce them as they come during the course of our program. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, we'll want to indulge you to watch a short video in remembering our brother and friend and comrade Akoto Ampaw.
We'll now have an invocation, and you'll be hearing the voice of Professor Kofi Anyidowo and the National Dance Company.
When I'm away, me and I'm low, Shena yellow, Mabona kukuga koko, Amake mako, Banya, Daddy na my Mabona kukuga. Me and I'm way. Mi yuena mulo, kukuga koko afike mato ogbanya dadi na mai. Oh magbona kukuga koko afike mato ogbanya dadi na mai. Ame makpo miyo enamwe miyo sheshe namulo miyo enamulo. Oh magbona kukuga koko afike mato ogbanya dadi na mai. Magbona kukuga miyo enamwe miyo enamulo. Amake mako ogbanya dadi na mai. Magbona jojoga
An invocation. An invocation. They caught my voice, gave it to guardians of the night, set a trap for my soul, and I had to rise to sudden call of death. Aonalu, anale, ule gbanye chona zato voy, enale, ule gbanye chona zato e. Onalu, enale, amadele gbanye chona zato voy. Enale, ula gbanye chona zatoe. Sheshe bakusi me milalu, miwe blamijo. Sheshe bakusi me milalu, miwe blamijo. Ana choza gbaja fure via ga chozando. Sina choza gbaja fure via ga chozando. Yo plashe tae. Have nubla nuivi faga lagbagba nale wala gbanye shone zatoe. This is how come I must forever love this land, fondle her memory in all daydreams, in all nightmares, and in all moments of sleepwalking. Serenade her beauty and love with breathless longing, even as I stumble and rise and stumble along alone into a future with no rest stops along the way, chasing after hopes and mirages, speeding away in my rearview mirror. I am the lover whose heart lost its way in the storm, chasing after whirlwinds, returned home to find my farmlands ravaged by harmattan fires, my barn eaten up by termites, my grinding stone cracked and bleeding from wounds filled with maggots. Some say my head is just not big enough for the size of my dreams. My heart too hollow for the weight, the depth, and density of a patriot's love. So how hard must I weep in broad daylight to pay for petty, petty crimes I commit at night? Even the pastor says he's fed up with my constant confessions. They say I must stop whining like an overgrown, spoiled child. I must listen more to cheers raised sky high by those who wish me well. Colleagues and comrades, family and friends, even good-natured foes, all in praise of little things I dared to do for the good of the land. despite all my petty crimes, mostly committed at night, sometimes in broad daylight, hoping no one was really watching. So this is how come I have forever loved this land, fondled her memory and love like a long lost and now newfound heirloom worth the premium value of my soul. Yes, this is how come I have forever loved this land, fondled her memory and love like a long lost and now newfound heirloom worth the premium value of my soul. But you see, they caught my voice, gave it to guardians of the night, set a trap for my soul, and I had to rise to sudden call of death. Enale, marala gbanye chore gbeto boy. Enale, yola gbanye chore azatoe. Enale, nalo marala gbanye chore azato boy. Enale, yola gbanye chora zatoe. Kwera kushime mielelo, miwe blamijo. Bajavio kushime mielelo, miwe blamijo. Ora choza gwaja pure via choza do. Ina choza gwaja pure via choza do. Yo plachetae, a heaven blani vifagala gwagwa nale. Enale, marela gbanye chora zatoe. Enale, ole gbanye chora zatoe. Nale, marela gbanye chora zatoe. Mao, nalo, ole gbanye chora zatoe. Nale, ole gbanye chora zatoe. Nalo, ole gbanye chora zatoe. Nale, ole gbanye chora zatoe. Kushime mielelo, miwe blamije. Kushime mielelo, miwe blamije. Wane choza gwaja pure via gachozando. Shine choza gwaja pure via gachozando. Oh, klashetae, I have a nubla nivi fagala gbebe nale. Nale, marela gwaje chora zatoe. Nalu, nale, marela gwaje chora gbetoe. Nale, marela gwaje chora zatoe.
Now to our main item in the program, and we have, as you would know, the main theme of our anniversary lecture is Problems of Democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. And the keynote speaker is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, who will be making a presentation titled The Crisis of Civic Citizenship in Contemporary Ghanaian Democracy, Lessons from the Life and Times of the late Akoto Ampaw. Professor Prempeh is the Executive Director of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, and Project Director for West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, a regional democracy defense network bringing together over 40 of West Africa's leading civil society actors. Professor Prempeh was previously a professor of law at Seton Hall University School of Law in New Jersey, the United States of America. He was also a constitutional advisor to the UN Special Envoy to Yemen, and an attorney with international law firms in Washington, D.C., all before he took the position of Executive Director of the CDD. He is currently a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, in Germany. This is a brief biography highlighting some of the key activities Professor Prempeh has engaged himself in. He's a very prolific writer also on questions of democracy and human rights. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present Professor Prempeh to you. Good morning. The Chair, Professor Kwame Kakari, and friends of Akoto Ampaw, the family of Akoto Ampaw, distinguished compatriots present here, and I see a good number. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. May I first and foremost commend the friends of Akoto Ampaw for seeing it fit and proper it is, to organize this first anniversary public lecture to remember and celebrate the life, work, and legacy of our dear friend, brother, and compatriot, citizen Akoto Ampaw, more popularly known as Sheshe or simply She, whose passing a year to the day this past Sunday, October 20th, left us all heartbroken. The organization that I'm privileged to lead, the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, was one of Sheshe's closest institutional friends and civil society allies. And we feel greatly honored to have been invited by friends of Akoto Ampaw to partner with them and with the Institute of African Affairs, University of Ghana, to organize this first anniversary public lecture in honor of Akoto Ampaw. I believe I speak for my colleagues at CDD, including the members of the board, when I say that the center would be glad and proud to have this idea and this collaboration with Friends of Akoto Ampaw properly institutionalized and made an annual affair going forward, thus giving birth, that is, to an annual Akoto Ampaw Memorial Lecture. Speaking in a more personal capacity, I feel deeply honored to have been chosen by Friends of Akoto Ampaw to deliver this first anniversary public lecture in honor of Sheshe. Sheshe was indeed a big brother and a very dear friend, but compared to all of the big brothers and big sisters in the pantheon of compatriots that have now constituted themselves into the Friends of Akoto Ampaw, I was a rather late comer to the party. Having met and come to know and share the company of Akoto Ampaw only during the last, perhaps a decade and a half or 2 decades or so of his post-teen life, spanning some 6 decades. But better late than never, for I am grateful beyond measure that Sheshe's path and mine did eventually cross, and in ways that have been profoundly enriching for me. Like so many of you here today, I do miss Sheshe very dearly, especially at a time such as this, when our nation appears rudderless and its nominally representative and other public institutions and the political classes increasingly disconnected from the everyday realities of the people and unable to inspire confidence about the future. I knew Akoto Ampaw by reputation long before we met in person. And when we did eventually meet, sometime in the mid-2000s, it was through our shared interest in helping as best we could to think and work through some of the problems and challenges of democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. It is therefore appropriate that the organizers of this first anniversary lecture in his honor would choose as its theme the problems of democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. Akoto Ampaw indeed spent a great deal of his time working to get our democracy and its institutions to work and to serve the needs and interests of all of its citizens. A cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world that is, and a lifelong Pan-Africanist whose belief in and commitment to equality and social justice traversed the boundaries of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, and class. Akoto Ampaw's world and work extended well beyond the shores of his homeland, Ghana. His activism on behalf of the causes he believed in date back to the 1970s when he worked tirelessly in the All Africa Students Movement. As a man not only of thought, but of action, Akoto Ampaw thought globally. But being also a practical man, he acted primarily locally. Home then, Ghana that is, was the principal site of Akoto's civic engagement and activism for the better part of his life. Thus, in looking at the problems of contemporary Ghanaian democracy from the prism of citizenship or the engaged citizen, I think it is equally befitting that we should turn for inspiration, as the sub-theme or topic of this lecture does, to Akoto's life as a citizen and appreciate the myriad ways in which he sought as citizen to make Ghana and Ghana's democracy better for all, as well as the constraints he had to navigate and the sacrifices he endured in the process. But before we return to Akoto's illustrious life of engaged citizenship, let us take stock first, but briefly, of the state of Ghana's democracy or democratic project 30-something years into the journey, and what that means for citizenship and the practice of citizenship in today's Ghana. To the outside world, Ghana is indeed a democracy exemplar, an African case of steady, successful democratization, a model, if you will. We owe this accolade, this enviable brand image, to a combination of the turbulent neighborhood we happen to be situated in and the tumultuous political history from which we ourselves have emerged as a country. In a neighborhood that has witnessed multiple recent instances of democratic collapse, as manifested by the return of military juntas in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, a neighborhood where leaders continue to evade or scheme to remove presidential term limit provisions so as to prolong their stay in office, where a career as an opposition politician could be a high-risk proposition, endangering one's very life. Ghana indeed stands tall as an oasis of stable, steady democratic progress since the country returned to constitutional democracy in January 1993. This progress is made more remarkable against the backdrop of a post-independent national history marked by successive failed attempts at institutionalizing democratic government, each past attempt terminated after only a few short years by coup d'etat, leaving the country with no history of a peaceful change of government through the ballot box before January 2001. Over the course of the decades and through a succession of over the course of the 3 decades since January 1993, and through a succession of regularly scheduled general elections, Ghana's democracy has evolved to become a highly competitive two-party system with the National Democratic Congress, NDC, and New Patriotic Party, NPP, taking turns in government in intervals of 8 years, 2001, 2009, 2017, and we await the next elections in a month or so. Election results where they have been disputed have been settled by the parties concerned through constitutionally prescribed judicial processes. Furthermore, a 2-term limit on presidential tenure and provisions for civilian control of the military, both important safeguards enshrined in the 1992 Constitution, enjoy broad public and cross-party support. Afrobarometer surveys show Ghanaians as consistently supportive of presidential term limits and opposed to all non-democratic forms of government, including military rule and one-party rule, by very high supermajorities. In short, then, the country's strong brand image appears well earned. The product, however, is an altogether different story. In terms of the rules of entry and exit, or how orderly the country chooses and changes its leaders and government, Ghana indeed scores high marks. However, once a government is in office, the rules of play, or how well the country is governed, and how public power and resources are used to address public problems, if at all, have remained chronically underwhelming and disappointing. In the interest of time, I will draw on only 3 examples to illustrate this problem. One from the economy, and I think Professor Kwabi Kakari actually did make mention to some of the challenges. The second example will be drawn from a dysfunctional feature of the constitutional system we operate, and the third from a perennial public problem that has defied solution despite successive changes of government. Ghana is in the final weeks of a crucial election year. This is happening at a time of exceptional economic angst amongst the population. The country is in the midst of its first ever sovereign debt default, and once again under some form of adult supervision by the IMF. The 17th time we have had to make recourse to the IMF since independence, and I believe the 6th time since the return to democratic government in 1993. This historic sovereign debt default has been accompanied by hyperinflation, which reached as high as 50 plus 2 years ago, and currently hovers around 25%, as well as haircuts on domestic investments by Ghanaians holding government bonds. But you wouldn't know any of this if you follow the candidates and their song and dance election campaigns across the country. On the campaign trail, you continue to hear promise upon promise of whatever needs to be said to win an election. What you will not hear is discussion of how to break the stranglehold of debt, of Eurobond debt, or the habit of IMF recidivism in which we are caught. No way out of the economic cul-de-sac. Just more Kool-Aid from the political parties and their candidates. After all, when push comes to shove, those we elect to run our public affairs, and for that matter, our economy, will, especially if a general election is on the horizon, simply turn to external managers we have never elected and cannot hold to account to step in again with a bailout and to steer the sinking economic ship back to safe harbor, albeit only temporarily. Constitutional system, we continue to hold on to a persistent colonial era model of local government, or better, local administration, characterized by a national elite paternalism towards local communities. No different from during the colonial period when the colonial authorities, represented by the governor, dealt with our local communities, the natives, so to speak, with an air of superiority and paternalism. So, 30-something years into democratic rule, our president, a lineal descendant of the colonial governor, continues to nominate and appoint the mayors or chief executives of all administrative districts across the country. Despite strong popular demand for local governments to elect their own chief executives, no supply has been forthcoming from the national elites at the center. A constitutional referendum originally scheduled for late 2019 was called off at the last minute by presidential fiat because the two parliamentary parties, the sole gatekeepers of constitutional revision under Ghana's elite-friendly constitution, could not reconcile their rival partisan preferences in the interest of the collective good. Thus, thanks to persistent elite inertia and an unwillingness to reach consensus on a critical piece of constitutional reform to democratize local government and empower local communities to take charge of their own affairs, our electoral democracy remains Accra-centered. The third example of our democracy's apparent inability to solve critical public problems, comes from the story of Galamsey, or illegal artisanal mining. Again, despite the scale and gravity of the devastation this widespread practice is causing to the country's ecology, water supply systems, and long-term public health, resolute action has not been forthcoming from the political classes. And here, they do not even pretend to conceal their self-serving reasons for not acting resolutely to stop the ecocide. If they did, they tell us, they risk losing votes in the illegal artisanal mining communities to their political rivals. Therefore, for the sake of their own political careers and partisan agendas, the ecocide and related adverse public health consequences must continue. And we are told this to our faces. Our democracy has been turned against us. Instead of a government of the people, by the people, for the people, we have ended up, it appears, with a government of the party, by the party, for the party, and its partisans. How to change this picture? This is where citizenship enters the equation. I think from Plato to Alexis de Tocqueville to Kofi Annan, political philosophers, statesmen, students of politics, all have long noted the indispensable role of an engaged citizenry or civic engagement in changing the course and quality of public affairs and government. Permit me to just cite a few from these best people that I've mentioned. Plato says, the punishment which the wise suffer, who refuse to take part in government, is to live under the rule of worse men, emphasizing the very importance of public participation, civic engagement. De Tocqueville says, the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by its private citizens. Right? So what citizens do in a democracy has a direct effect on the quality of democracy that they are likely to enjoy, says Alexis de Tocqueville. And our own Kofi Annan had this to say, if there is enough noise, enough pressure, enough organization, the leaders will follow the people. If the people are apathetic, they don't vote, They are leaving the field wide open to the politicians to do what they want. So then, what is to be done? What have we been doing or not doing right? Because I believe that when you look through the record, and we will share some of the evidence, it appears that we vote in very high numbers, probably above average globally, and certainly on the continent. So what is it that has been lacking? What are the choices and options and opportunities and tools available to us as citizens that we might use to change the narrative that I have just presented? The most obvious form of civic engagement is, of course, voting. And God knows that Ghanaians love to vote. Afrobarometer tells us that when asked about the one civic activity that they had participated in the last year, Ghanaians since 2008, roughly around 75% of Ghanaians said they voted in the last election. So there's very high level of public participation when it comes to voting. Not so other forms of participation, especially when asked, when did you last participate in a demonstration or protest? 5% in 2022, from 4% in 2012. The peak was around 15% 2019. Perhaps we can gain some insights from the late economist and social scientist Albert Hirschman and his influential work, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations and States. What Hirschman sought to do or answer in this very influential book, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, is how we might respond as citizens of a state, consumers of a product, or members of an organization to a sustained decline or retrogression in the quality of the service or satisfaction or value we receive from that state, from that government, from that firm, from that market, or from that organization to which we belong. Hirschman organizes these various options into three. You can exit, that is, express your dissatisfaction by just withdrawing your support or patronage. If it's possible, you could switch. If there's only, you've been patronizing one line of service, you could switch to the alternative if there is a suitable one available. You could also quit entirely, just sit on the fence, just basically lose interest. And you could literally vote with your feet by migrating. And Ghanaians do some of all of this. Secondly, he says, you can resort to voice. You can resort to voice, by which Hirschman means you can become engaged or more engaged, deploying various active options or forms of civic engagement in an attempt to stimulate, provoke, influence, or cause change in the desired direction. Then there is loyalty. That's his third option. When you are in your loyalty mode, well, you have pretty much resigned yourself to fate, so to speak. It's more like the do-nothing different option. You put up with the bad service or governance and ride out the bad times in the hope and expectation, at best, that things would get better. Hirschman did not use these as mutually exclusive categories, though in his view, the only two options that counted, because they both sought to change, to cause a change in the decline one was experiencing, were exit and voice. Didn't count loyalty as very effective. And of voice, Hirschman calls voice the political action par excellence and a residual of exit because, as he writes, and I quote, it is the only way in which dissatisfied customers or members can react whenever the exit option is unavailable. So when you are stuck in the system, when you can't quit it, when you can't leave it, Eshman says you have nothing else but voice. Few people I know have explored and deployed as full a range of voice options in their lives as citizens as Akoto Ampaw did in his life. Neither exit, quitting, nor loyalty, keeping silent on doing nothing in the face of a deteriorating or bad situation, seemed available or attractive as options for citizen Akoto Ampaw. Let me just run through the various ways in which Akoto Ampaw tried to exert voice. And note that in this framework, in Hirschman's framework, voting, any form of public participation counts. Right? So voting is also voice. So of course, I never went into the, polling booth with Akoto Ampaw, but I knew that he was a very civic-minded person, and he would vote. When I encountered him the first time, though, it was interesting. It was as a community organizer, and this was even before the transition to democracy. So some workers working for Ghana, GTP, I forgot exactly the words, in my neighborhood in Tema, there was this guy who was a GTP worker, trade unionist, who was quite interested in the politics of the moment under PNDC. And when I would come from college, from university on vacation, he would come by and engage me in all kinds of conversation about politics, Marxism and the like. He had a lot of choice words that I had never heard. I was a business student. So he would come with words like comprador and all of those. I'm like, what's comprador? So that became his nickname, when we saw each other, say comprador, comprador. And I would ask him, where are you getting all these very fanciful ideas? Then he would say, oh, do you know Sheshe? I say, no, I don't know Sheshe. Do you know Yal Graham? I said, no, I don't know these people. I mean, they probably belong in a different camp. And I am a business student. I'm trying to make money. So that is the first time I heard about Akoto Ampaw. And my very good friend Porsche, called him Posh, he would sing their praises and talk eloquently about it. But Akoto Ampaw at the time, then what I learned was that he belonged in this group that would come to the industrial area of Tema and meet with workers in their workplaces and educate them about politics, about rights, labor rights, and all of those things, right? So he was more or less what we would call a community organizer. That's the first act of citizenship of Akoto Ampaw that I recall having encountered just by reputation. Then, of course, he was a lawyer, right? Now, being a lawyer by itself doesn't make you a civic-minded person. We should know that, right? And in fact, Akoto Ampaw did work for a firm you would call a commercial law firm. Almost all law firms in Ghana are commercial law firms, really. That's how they make their bread and butter. But even in his law firm, and to many of us who encountered him in his capacity as a lawyer, Akoto Ampaw was very much a public interest lawyer at heart. So he was very much involved in causes that normally, garden variety lawyers would not take because it made them no money. So he represented a lot of causes in the courts as a litigator. He also advised, the first, Radio Eye, the emergence of Radio Eye as a private broadcast station. When you read the history, Akoto Ampaw's name appears there. A number of libel and sedition cases in the Supreme Court from 1993 to 1996. He was there representing journalists and others. We later encounter him in election petitions, right? Representing his client, representing his law partner, the current president, in his presidential election petitions. But it's a very interesting thing to note about Akoto is that while he did participate in politics, and sometimes on behalf of persons whose politics he may not have shared, or even if he shared them. I would joke sometimes with you and say, me, I'm not MPP. But, even if it was MPP, say, but I'm not a foot soldier. He was never a partisan. Akoto Ampaw was a patriot, and when he did politics as a patriot. He was not a partisan. He was a protester par excellence. All right? Kumi Prekon, we remember him for his role with the Alliance for Change in Kumi Prekon. But actually, I remember him just going on a routine anti-corruption march with us through the streets of Accra on, I think, anti-corruption day or one of those events. And he was with a lot of young people from CDD. He was wearing his red stuff, carrying. We walked all the way from, I think, Kwame Nkrumah Circle to El Wak Stadium, and he did the distance with us. This is during the time when his law partner and friend was president. So Akoto Ampaw, for him, this was civic responsibility, right? And Akoto Ampaw was actually a candidate for elective office. That's one of the acts of participation, of citizenship. Running for office. Akoto Ampaw actually ran for political office. Most of us don't know that. He doesn't like to talk about that. He didn't like to talk much about that. But I don't know how badly he lost. But he did lose the election on the ticket of the Convention People's Party. I think it was the 1996 elections in this home constituency. And he was also available for public service, but not in the ways in which we have come to understand them. Akoto Ampaw did not seek public service just because a person had been elected that he knew he would not go lobby for a job. In fact, some of the jobs that the public service engagements he got, I'm sure, were because others were not lobbying for them. Because I remember that I served with him on the Law Reform Commission, 2 terms, and it was one of the least remunerative positions you could get. There was no queue to be on the Law Reform Commission, actually. And the interesting thing about his service on the Law Reform Commission, as I recall, is that in the 2nd term, which is this current term, where he was our chair, he was absent on grounds of ill health. And yet he read our minutes and followed the agenda, and there was one particular issue we're considering. A codification of the defamation, the common law of defamation was being codified. Akoto Ampaw, of course, being a very strong free speech advocate and a friend of the media, had taken a very keen interest in this, I remember, from the previous commission on which I served as well. And he sent in a note to the chairperson in his absence, acting chair in his absence, that he felt very strongly about a certain proposal in the draft, which would have expanded the scope of the law of defamation to codify and judicialize, for that matter, everyday insults. Right? And Akoto Ampaw thought, that's weird. The Law Reform Commission's job, in his view, was to promote the progressive development of the law, not to go in a regressive direction. And in any case, and this view was shared by some of us on the commission with him, the judicial forum was not the appropriate place to take everyday insults and things of that nature. That we have much more important things to worry about than that. So, and he made his position very, very clear. He had already made that position in a memorandum that he had done for, I think, the Media Foundation for West Africa to the first commission. And that had a big influence on why the process stalled, because we got the same proposal in the first commission, but the process stalled largely because of the objections and some of the reservations raised in Akoto Ampaw's memo on behalf of the Media Foundation. He also served on the National Media Commission. It's a constitutional body that is supposed to safeguard the independence of the media against governmental encroachment, and Akoto Ampaw did serve on the National Media Commission. These were all part-time roles because he continued his career as a lawyer. And I also, in fact, thanks to former Attorney General here, Gloria Akufo, he and I were invited to assist and advise the Attorney General in 2017 in representing Ghana against Cote d'Ivoire in our international maritime boundary case, which took us in the company of the Attorney General to various places, to London, to Hamburg, to represent the government and the people of Ghana. And Akoto Ampaw was there. Spent long nights doing drafts and edits and the like, and rehearsing speeches with the Attorney General, who was the agent of the government of Ghana in that case, which we won resoundingly, bringing more oil money, but I don't think Akoto got any of that. Akoto was also an advisor and a friend of civil society in many different ways. CDD, we got pro bono legal advice from him on a number of issues, especially labor-related issues. If we thought that we wanted to make a decision and we thought that we wanted to make sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's and not got in trouble with the law, we would have Akoto Ampaw counsel us on how to handle it. Star Ghana Foundation, before that, Star Ghana, before it was a foundation, he's been with them, through the initial stages. Media Foundation for West Africa, he was a strong advisor to the trade unions, right? In many ways, the labor movement was one of the closest friends of Akoto Ampaw. And then he was just the regular citizen, without any particular portfolio, right? Citizen without portfolio. So he became, when the anti-LGBT bill was introduced, we at CDD led a number of civil society organizations, a few of them, spontaneously, to put together a coalition, a human rights coalition, to oppose the bill. We held meetings. We then put together a memorandum stating our objections to the bill that we then were getting ready to present to Parliament. Unbeknownst to us, Akoto Ampaw had also organized a group, a separate group of citizens, not CDD, not an institution, just private individuals. And I think a few days or maybe just the night or two before we submitted our memorandum to Parliament, here Akoto Ampaw shows up at the office with a draft of their own memorandum of this group, the Big 18, we came to call them, which essentially, raising roughly some of the same objections and more that the CDD Human Rights Coalition memorandum was also raising about the bill. And this again was very spontaneous. We had, in fact, no inkling that he had made that move, but he became the de facto leader of that group of 18. And the WhatsApp platform that was formed to encourage deliberation within the group has outlived Akoto Ampaw, and we continue to have close chats and other interesting conversations on that memo. On the day that the memo was heard in Parliament, before the Committee of Parliament, I presented on behalf of CDD Ghana and the coalition, and Akoto Ampaw presented on behalf of the Big 18 on the floor of Parliament. He was also a very strong public voice. Some of the images we've seen of him standing on the podium and talking. He appeared before, he was available to appear before, news and public affairs programs on TV, on radio. I remember writing, co-authoring a couple of op-ed pieces with him in the Graphic about some matters that we were both concerned with. So you see that from the entire spectrum, this is a very wide spectrum of acts of citizenship. These are all acts of active citizenship, public engagement, trying to change the course of affairs, using all the tools at one's disposal, right? I remember when, and a lot of this is just a labor of love, right? There isn't anything, there was no remuneration attached to much of this task. I remember when a young woman who had otherwise qualified to be admitted to the bar was denied admission on the basis of some things that she had posted about herself on social media. That's liberal democracy in Ghana for you. And this was by the judicial establishment. I mean, basically the gatekeepers of admission to the bar. I didn't know that they were snooping around people's Facebook pages to see, if you describe yourself as gay or whatever, then they will say, in this particular instance, that was the crime, actually. So she said, well, no, you can't belong to the bar. And then, of course, Akoto Ampaw shot to action on her behalf. I remember I was late somewhere in Dakar, I think, when he said, we have to put something together, a statement together to go before the General Legal Council. And, Akoto Ampaw doesn't do social media or any of these things. So I shot into action, did some, research online, finding some cases and whatever. And this is late in the night. I think it was, Dakar time, which is probably the same time here, past midnight. And completely thankless job. I mean, he was basically doing this so that he could represent. But she wouldn't get any representation. No lawyer was willing to represent her. So we were approached, and then, of course, our first point of call was Akoto Ampaw, and he took the case, right? So this is how, in my view, this is how Akoto Ampaw exemplified active citizenship in these various ways, litigating in the courts, trying to get into public office by election, if not accepting the appropriate appointment to make change and influence some decisions that were being made by public commissions and others. Representing clients on cases that will affect the direction of the law. That's some of the big precedents in our constitutional evolution from 1993 and to about 1998 or 2000 were actually hatched in the Akufo-Addo law firm, and Akoto Ampaw was a key pillar of all of those processes. So this is what, in my little review, has told me about how Akoto Ampaw exercised voice under Hirschman's formulation. Exit was not an option for him, neither was loyalty, as Hirschman defines it, because in Hirschman's definition, remember, it's resigning yourself to fate, so to speak, the do nothing different mode, just wait and see and pray, which is in fact a common mode of civic engagement, if you could call it that, in the Ghanaian context. Of course, the Hirschman framework naturally encounters challenges and reveals its limitations when you insert it into the contemporary Ghanaian context. Still, I believe that applying it as an analytical tool helps us understand the complex and severe crisis that face civic engagement and active citizenship in Ghana today. So let's begin with exit. Remember, under Hirschman's formulation, exit is where you withdraw your support or patronage of a deteriorating product or service, like a boycott, essentially, right? So it's some form of engagement because you are no longer actively supporting that cause in the hope and expectation that by withdrawing your support, it would affect patronage for the service, and then whoever is providing it, government, business, whatever, would alter their behavior, fix the product, do something better. Now, when you insert it into our system, how does it look like? We operate a two-party, a duopoly, right? A duopolistic political system in a highly polarized winner-take-all political culture. How does exit look like in that kind of a context, right? So exit occurs in a variety of ways. Dissatisfied citizens or voters can switch between parties. But ours being duopolistic, it means that a choice, practically speaking, I mean, there are 13 or so people on the ballot. I think if the Electoral Commission was more diligent and scrupulous, there would be fewer. One has to wonder why we have the numbers that we keep having on the ballot every election year, when in fact some of the requirements for being a party, separate from independent candidate, clearly you and I know most of these so-called parties on the ballot do not meet it. But there is folklore about why it is that they are on the ballot. And it is basically as proxies for one or the other of these two parties, for the purpose of influencing decision-making at the IPAC, is the theory that I hear. But when you have a duopoly, exit makes sense. Switching makes sense only if there is substantial product differentiation. See, I told you I went to business school here, so my language is mostly marketing. I once sold cigarettes. That was my first job after leaving university. And we differentiated our brand 555 from Rothmans. And my father would tell you there was a difference because he smoked, right? So if there is product differentiation, you have a duopoly and the alternative is really different and offers you a different value proposition, then you could actually switching as a form of exit makes sense. However, where the rival parties look or do alike alternatives, or where the alternative is scary for some, merry for the other, but pretty much the same for the everyday Ghanaian, then we are left with a choiceless democracy. A democracy where changing and switching parties and faces leads to no discernible improvement in the quality of government or of democracy. This, I would argue, describes the contemporary Ghanaian situation, where successive party turnover in government has changed little about how and for whose benefit this country is governed. As a matter of fact, there isn't a whole lot of switching going on between the two rival parties. For a vast majority of Ghanaians, that is not even on the table. Hirschman's framework appears to assume that the choices citizens make in a democracy are autonomous and endogenous. In reality, we know that strong attachments, some of them pre-existing attachments to party, rooted in lineage, ethno-regional ties, religion, and other such identities, often make large populations of our citizens, possibly upwards of 80% between the two parties, just immovable, right? So they will stick with one or the other party no matter what. No matter the decline in government, no matter the decline in service, there is no switching. So for them, exit doesn't quite come about. Moreover, such partisans, and that's how I would call them, often have no interest or desire to change the status quo or how the system works, just as long as their parties continue to take turns in power in 8-year intervals. Voice, when it is used by such partisans, is only used opportunistically when their rivals are in power and only to enhance their own party's prospect of returning to power, not to change the democratic or governance quality. So exit looks a bit interesting when you don't have real choice in a democracy, when you have a duopoly with very little or no product differentiation. The real crisis of citizenship in contemporary Ghana, however, is the fact that beyond voting, there is generally very little voice in the sense of active citizenship and participation in the various democratic institutions which with intent to change or improve the workings or outcomes of the system. So the kind of active citizenship I've described, and in terms of the spectrum of options that Akoto exercised, there is very little of that. You ask, but how so? There's a lot of venting on radio and TV. In fact, there is, right? So maybe we'll call that noise, right, as opposed to voice. There's a lot of that also. But just look at exactly how it works, right? So with media houses captured by politicians and parties, various media houses representing, being owned by or representing one or the other party in the spectrum, voice is not that kind of voice I'm talking about. Yes, there's venting, there's some ranting, but they usually cancel out. They cancel out because essentially sometimes also the patterns of the media and the way in which they have bought into the duopoly, right? So all conversations are framed in a duopolistic manner, in a binary manner. It's either NPP or NDC. And then when you have that, it becomes a shouting match, really very little, a lot of heat, but no light, right? So what kind are we talking about? What kind of voice are we talking about? We're talking about the kind of voice that Akoto Ampaw exercised. All of those spectrum of choices, right? Why is it? And we have Afrobarometer data telling us that actually that is very, very low. Public participation is extremely low compared to 81% or 75 plus participating in voting. 5% would join the protest, right? 2 years ago, when the crisis hit, when the economy went through a tailspin, right? When the economy went through a tailspin, a foreign observer who was deeply concerned about what was happening because Sri Lanka had happened, was very concerned and called me. He says, Kwesi, is everything okay here? Is everything safe? And I assured him that everything was safe and that we may have a Sri Lankan crisis, but we have a Ghanaian response. And he felt assured. He felt assured because it was coming from me and he knew that I would tell him the truth. But he was puzzled. He said, exactly why? Because after some months and he didn't see the Sri Lankan response, he called me back. He said, exactly explain this to me. Why is it that this kind of economy, this kind of tailspin, and not a sign of anything, no protest, nothing? So that's the task for me too, right? I couldn't give him a straightforward answer. We had a good conversation, but that's what the data suggests, that we do not do a lot of public participation, not just protesting, calling on parliamentarians, but when you look at the data also on trust in institutions, then you begin to understand some of that. We have, again, Afrobarometer tells us, we have extremely low trust in the institutions of democracy, right? Whether it's parliament, opposition party, ruling party, the president, even the courts, the police, very, very low trust, public trust in these institutions, and declining, right? So between 2012 and 2022, for example, trust in parliament has gone down by 22 percentage points, in the courts by 20 percentage points, in the police by 16 percentage points, in the president by 24 percentage points, just like that. I mean, so there isn't, if you don't trust an institution, and it is that institution that is gatekeeping and going to solve your problem, presumably, how are you going to activate activism dealing with that institution, right? So trust, I think, is one of the answers to the question. But I think Hirschman also, when you put his theory or his framework here, again, it encounters some interesting things. Hirschman probably thinks that, I know that he's more sophisticated, that probably didn't think it this way, but when you look at it as citizens in a democracy, maybe products and goods and services may be different. But citizens are not a monolith, right? We experience government differently. And especially in a very blatant, unabashed, party-first ideology regime system, right? So we operate the system where the parties are very unabashed about being first and foremost mutual benefit organizations for their members. And they will tell you, but why should we give it to you? Are we also not also Ghanaians? We start with us first. Charity begins at home. So public goods, right? So you may be experiencing very bad government, but actually the political class has managed to find a way in which they use public power and incumbency to divert public resources and opportunities in favor of partisans so that they will be having a different experience from you. So while you are protesting, they're asking you, what is wrong with you? It has never been this good, right? Because they're having a completely different experience of government from what you are experiencing. The party government doesn't serve the citizens generally in that way. Thus, even when there is voice, it is met with often harsh rival counter voice, right? So we invest, when you look at where party investments go, the parties have, I don't know if I know any party policy advisor, but there are lots of party communicators. It's the new profession in our democracy. Party communicators, government communicators, they're all over the place. These are propagandists, and they are putting out a narrative that is basically maybe very different from your reality, right? But that's their job. And the other side is countering them with their own alternative reality. It's basically, that's how the voice is working on the ground. So, but if you are getting government jobs, not through merit, but because of partisan criteria, you are getting government scholarships because of partisan criteria, you are getting government contracts because of partisan criteria, then how are you going to say that you and I share the same experience of bad government? You are experiencing something different. In fact, even public goods like streets and roads, sometimes are distributed based on such criteria. So you would find that somebody can say, because you don't know any big person. The road to your place is not nice, crowd. Come and see the other guy. He's just two rows behind you. Yeah? You see the road, they've done his fine. You are sitting on TV talking grammar. You see your road. Right? So my experience from that person's experience of government is different. And we do these things, right? Then protest. Why do we protest so little? There are huge barriers, right? But I think structurally too, there are some points that we need to consider, right? So when you have a very over-centralized state as we do, right? Over-centralized government where everything that is going to be good for the country that must happen cannot happen unless you get the attention of the president who resides only in Accra and in one office. And everything bad that needs to be undone in this country cannot get any traction if you don't get that same person's attention. You are very highly centralized. So when you have to do collective action, protest, where are you going to do it? In Bogoso? If you don't have access to Accra, it will not get political traction. Decision makers don't reside at the local level. Right? So you may be feeling the pinch of the problem at the local level, but nobody there can remedy the situation for you. So when you over-centralize government, it increases the cost of protest and other forms of activism that need to get the attention of those who can resolve the problem, right? And of course, when you do that, it shuts out lots of people who cannot access, who don't have access to the center, especially youth and women, who, in fact, if there was more power at the local level, right, within reach of your home, you could go and protest. Those who are disproportionately disfavored in terms of resources would actually probably be more active citizens, right, than they can be now. But there are other protests, there are other barriers that are very, very intentional. And here, heavy-handed policing. Policing, the use of heavy-handed policing and a complicit court system to basically prevent and discourage protest, right? In a very, it's almost paradoxical. African governments, I have noticed, sometimes fear protest even more than they fear voting. Because, voting, you can do things with voting, right? And in fact, one of the reasons why switching also doesn't make a whole lot of sense is that there's a lot of vote buying, right? Governments and parties spend lots of money buying votes. It's not easy to buy protests like that, right? You can set up a counter-protest, of course, but a determined protester, can't be bought off that easily. So they prevent it. So government that allow voting prevent protest. It sounds paradoxical, right? The voting is the one that will take you out. But protest, you don't even want protest to happen, right? And this is notwithstanding effort by people like Akoto, who in the early years of our revolution, of our democracy, managed to get the Supreme Court, right? Lawyers managed to get the Supreme Court to rule that citizens have a right to protest. And that doesn't include getting pre-clearance or permission from the police. That is still the law of the land. Notwithstanding that, you can't protest if the police do not want you to protest. So there are real barriers to protest, right? And I've mentioned counter-mobilization by parties. You protest, the most organized force in the country are political parties. That's the most organized force in the country politically. So when they put people on the streets, it's difficult to counter them. You are doing a protest, you have only 50 people, and they bring 1,000 to counter you. What are you going to do? Right? And then there's religion. Right? It plays a very interesting role, appears in different places when we talk about voice. Religion is playing a very interesting role in our politics. Right? Depending on the type of religion, it could say, well, your problems are not with government, just go and pray. Right? Prayer will solve the problem. And so you disengage. You are wasting time going to protest when you should be in church or mosque or seeing the pastor. Because that's where the solution is going to come from according to that theology. Right? So a lot of citizens, they become more on the loyalty side of the thing. Let's just wait and pray and see how things will change. Another angle, I think, in other places that would have been really very good in a democracy is participating in parties. Because parties really have become the conduits through which we recruit our political leadership. So if you want to make change, in many respects, if parties were democratic, deliberative bodies, policy-making bodies about ideas, a lot of people should be going through that. But our parties are not those. They are just election-winning machines that mobilize basically to win elections. And even their internal processes are not democratic. If you want to contest as a member of parliament, some of the criteria would say you have to show that you have nurtured the constituency. Do you understand what that means? Nurtured the constituency as a requirement for becoming a candidate in a party. It means you must have spent money in the preceding 4 years taking care of the party executives and the gatekeepers who are going to make it possible for you to become a candidate. Right? Now, how is that going to encourage many young people, many women, and people without means, but who have serious civic interest? How is that going to encourage them when you have a party system like that? It shuts out a lot of people. So that is not an avenue for them. And in fact, the running for office, as even an independent, Akoto did that. He ran for office as a candidate of a party. But in an entrenched duopoly, the cost, the entry barriers are huge. The cost of politics in Ghana is staggering. Staggering. You would be surprised to hear some of the numbers. presidential, I don't know what it is now, but some years back, CDD did a survey with Westminster Center for Democracy. Over a decade ago, the numbers were, over $100 million, right? Now it's probably double, right? Members of parliament spend, and it's not just for the election, you have to almost take care of your constituents, carry them for 4 years. So basically, it's prohibitive. You can't use that channel to get into office to change anything, right? So the structural barriers are real, right? There are these structural barriers. So I think that while Hirschman's formulation, I think, helps us to organize our thinking around these issues, when you put it on the ground and you overlay it on the structure that we have in Ghana, it's very difficult. Then you can understand the low numbers. It's not that there's some apathy, by all means, right? Especially people who have to fend for themselves. If you go on a protest, Charlie, you come back, there's no water. Water is not flowing. There is doom so, and you are sweaty. You can't eat. So all of these things, right? So are we then stuck? I don't have an answer to that question, but I think that it is in the long-term sustainable interest of our democracy to unfreeze these parts, especially citizen protest. We must take a very hard look at our attitude towards citizen protest, because the more you prevent young people from venting, when you don't have options for them, the more things bottle up. I think we should allow protest as much as we can, as long as it is orderly. We should allow protest. We should try not to prevent them. The African population is very youthful. They have a lot of energy. Protest should be allowed for young people to vent. We must reform our political parties. The amount of money in our politics is obscene. I used to be against public funding for parties. Now I'm not. But only on condition that when we take it over, we take over everything. We take over billboards. We take over everything. We script it. And it's done in other African countries. I was in Dakar before the elections, not a single billboard, because they opened the election window a few weeks before election. Ghana has a 4-year election window. The moment you lose election, your billboard stays because you are waiting to come back. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So some of these changes have to be done to liberate voice, because as Hirschman says, that is the political action par excellence. And without that, there is no peaceful alternative to changing course in our democracy. Without that, I don't see any peaceful alternative to changing course. Without that and structural reform of a lot of the institutions we have mentioned, we are setting ourselves on a slippery slope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thank you very, very much. With your indulgence, we'll make a very slight but interesting adjustment to our program. Before we call the discussants to come up here with their responses, and Akunu, with your permission, the great organizer, with your permission, a friend of Akoto Ampaw wants to come and give us a poem. We hope it's not a volume of poems. But Mr. Roland Akusa, who is an alumnus of this university and also of University of Pennsylvania, he says he's now an entrepreneur. We wish he could have made money and financed Akoto Ampaw's exploits. But he says he also doubles as an amateur poet. But the more important thing is that 51 years ago, as a teenager, and together with other students, he joined Sheshe and other university students to construct irrigation canals at Dawenya, I believe during the very early months of Colonel Champon's regime. So, Mr. Akoto, we are all ears.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ode to Freedom in memory of the immortal Tony Sheshe. Ode to Freedom in memory of the immortal Tony Sheshe. When a haunting silence befalls our land, as in a graveyard solitude, not with you, my dear friend, not with a stranger, let alone a foe, I dare share in the incandescent light of everyday banter, of everyday gratitude, waxing, waning, in a welcoming warmth of a people unafraid to share. How often I mumble, but to myself, with no one with whom to talk. I seem like a troubled mind who at my own shadow, into a smile, I beam. You, how often you grumble, but to yourself, with no one with whom to talk. You seem like a muddled mind. When agitated, you shadow box to let off steam. Now, we know his kind of antics, he who forces on us a stern silence. While high on adolescent innocence, we wager when we play at marbles. When a bully overrules a rule, we put up with him in a stoic silence. Still, hit or miss, winning fair and square makes for a good game of marbles. But when might rules the roost, the fabled strong man overrules our choice, as missing the virtues of candor, of valor, of ardor, so upon us imposes his will. Bourgeois vices, says he, so vile, so vain, can't at the pool of a fair choice. But relents when he reckons a legion's indomitable will, wilting his mortal will. Wasn't Asantua, the warrior queen, seemed as playing marbles while her men played possum when a scoffer made demeaning demands? But her ground she stood, such as we wait out a bully at a game of marbles. So too, by a votive will, a people are to wait the strong man's domineering demands. Now a matriarch bears a creed, no sword of a queen warrior, secular, prosecutorial, magisterial. She holds court to protect kith from kin. She abides the doctrine of wolves, populi wolves day, but no ideologue warrior. Now therefore the glory of our people's compact. We the people have staked a claim to freedom's story. As coups spring to life on a dewy African dawn, we enact, as cause crow, a revitalizing, timeless ritual, our story. Our heralds bear tidings in images as in a mirror held to the face, crooning, owing, eyeing, in cheers, in jeers, in heat, in wind, in rain, in the chill. They beam our people's travails onto our people, into the mind, into the heart, on the face. Still, above the day-long din of shrill voices lies freedom stories thrill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Kusa. Now we come to the responses by our two discussants. The first discussant is Professor Georgie Chikata. Professor Georgie Chikata is a distinguished professor of development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and an adjunct professor at the Institute of African Studies, this one. Professor Chikata is the immediate past director of this institute, that is where we are holding this anniversary, the Institute of African Studies in the University of Ghana. She has been an active member of the women's movement in Ghana and in Africa since she was a student, and I bear witness to her when I was a little girl with no plaited hair yet, still very active in the movement for democracy and women's rights. So she's quite a pioneer and still looking very youthful. She's a founding member of the Network of Women's Rights in Ghana, NetRight, and also of the Third World Network in Africa. Professor Chikata, we are all ears for you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kakari, for that introduction. I also want to congratulate the Friends of Akoto Ampaw for instituting this lecture. And I noted what the speakers, first speaker said, that we should institutionalize the lecture. I hope Friends of Akoto Ampaw are listening, and I hope that this will happen. I was really grateful when I received the invitation to be discussant, because for me it was an opportunity to reflect on Kwesi Prempeh's lecture, which I knew would basically hit the spot, but also to offer my own perspectives on the civic space and on the life and times of our dear comrade and friend Akoto Ampaw, affectionately known as Sheshi. So this lecture has been wide-ranging. It has discussed the problems of our democratic dispensation. It has shown us very clearly that this model of democracy is suffering from a myriad of problems: economic mismanagement, problematic centralization of power, and a distorted local government system, and a failure to address some of the burning issues that we face because of the self-interest of the elites who run the system. Most importantly, I think this lecture has established the importance of engaged citizenship as one of the solutions to the crisis of democracy. Prempeh also brought to life, in a very beautiful way, Akoto Ampaw's example of full-throated and robust citizenship. And for that, I was very grateful. I also noted his critical application of Hirschman's framework on civic engagement. And I particularly was struck by the critical points he made about the ways in which it does not fully apply to our situation. He even went as far as to offer some preliminary solutions to this crisis we have in civic engagement. And I hope that we'll have the chance to hear more of his ideas at another date and engage with them. I, for example, have always thought that civil society should be struggling for proportional representation as the form of government in Ghana, rather than keep this first past the post system. I also think if political parties want to be funded, they must change the way they bring candidates to light. In other systems, we have the list system, which allows for all sorts of disadvantaged and marginalized citizens to participate in our politics and in our elections and to be elected. In South Africa, the fact that we have almost the same number of men and women in the South African Parliament it's not an accident. It's a direct result of the list system. So there are so many ways in which we can begin to improve our democracy and our civic citizenship. Sheshe came of political age in the 70s, and this was a period of great ferment in Ghana. And although Ghana was under military rule, the level of discontent and disintegration of the economy and society was such that civic activism was at an all-time high. The Professional Bodies Association, the TUC, the Students' Movement were all engaged in the struggle to end dictatorship and economic mismanagement on different fronts. Recognizing that protesting corruption and mismanagement was not enough, a group of leftists and social democrats, including Sheshe, formed a broad progressive movement, the New Democratic Movement, known as the NDM, to chart a course of change and transformation for Ghana. When I first met Sheshe in the early 80s at the University of Ghana, where I was an undergraduate student, he was a student leader, a member of the executive committee of the NDM, the anti-imperialist movement, which had ambitions to work for a national democratic revolution in Ghana. The International Students Movement, the Workers' Movement, and the space created by the 31st December Revolution of the early 80s became terrains on which he and many comrades struggled, alongside popular movements for economic emancipation and social justice for all. When Sheshe was detained for over 2 years, between 1987 and 1989, James Ford became his terrain of struggle. As a young lawyer working as part of the now defunct Ghana Association of Democratic Lawyers, we visited a few prisons to document the situation of young persons who had been held in remand for over long periods. At James Ford, Sheshe presented us with his own list of remand cases he wanted us to take up. The Fourth Republic brought liberal democracy, the politics of patronage, a deepening of neoliberalism, but it also created instability at the heart of the nation, which also affected the civic space. Broad, multifaceted movements lost ground to NGOs with more professionalized and specialized approaches to work in the civil space. As well, members of movements such as the New Democratic Movement adapted to this new terrain of struggle. It has resulted in the proliferation of single-issue politics. It has weakened the ability of civil society to mobilize society as a whole and to defend their civic space and civic citizenship. In addition to the points that Kwesi Prempeh made about the crisis of the civil space and the factors responsible for it, I want to point out that the crisis of citizenship has also exposed the false promise of liberal democracy. I think Professor Kakari alluded to that when he asked, what are our political parties for? This, together with the rampaging neoliberalism, has circumscribed civil citizenship into an echo chamber in which citizens are allowed to vent frustrations without redress, with the promise that the next 4 years they are going to be able to change government. And even this little space of frustration is fast shrinking, and Prempeh's lecture demonstrates it very clearly. We've seen the rise in state authoritarianism on one hand, but also the rise of conservative and unaccountable non-state actors on the other hand. We are in this complicated situation where citizens groups are under severe attack, but also are perpetrators or bystanders. Take the media, for example. Attacks on media personnel by party political operatives and the coercive arms of the state have become quite rampant and alarming and should be totally condemned and resisted. However, the media has not shied away from joining lynch mobs to manufacture consensus against the LGBT community, one of the most marginalized and stigmatized communities in our civic space. People with opposing views have been subjected to heavily skewed panel discussions, heckling, gotcha tactics in the media, providing ammunition for their harassment by some of the most conservative and authoritarian segments of our society. The media is so busy in this exercise that there has been no serious scrutiny of the unconstitutionality of Parliament's conduct in passing this bill. Another threat to the civic space is the increasing strength and influence of the chieftaincy institutions, which is increasingly dominated by highly educated professionals needing to burnish their achievements with this added layer of power, made even more powerful by its chameleon-like quality. Many Ghanaians have the mistaken belief that this is a cultural institution which embodies what it means to be Ghanaian, and that it also represents the lowest level of development. You often hear people say that chiefs know what's wrong with their communities, and they are best placed, therefore, to make decisions about development. Using this principle of subsidiarity, some have argued that it is the chiefs who know best what their subjects need. This misuse of subsidiarity has fueled calls for a second chamber in our parliament composed of chiefs, as if we already do not have enough trouble in our democracy. While this has not been successful, chiefs have increased their grip on civic life in all sorts of ways, adjudicating conflicts, issuing punishments such as banishment, fines, and other forms of humiliation to anyone who falls foul of nebulous crimes and misdemeanors. So here we are. Citizens are caught between the contradictory status of being both citizens and subjects, with implications for their rights to free speech, freedom of conscience, association, and personhood. This also has ramifications for economic citizenship. Recent land tenure reforms under the LAP have strengthened the power of chiefs over land and weakened the principles of communal land ownership and fiduciary positions of traditional rulers, and turned them into vectors of land grabbing by national elites and transnational corporations. And many of the landless poor now have to rely on share contracts with steep costs that threaten their right to make a decent living and therefore express their economic citizenship. The collusion between the state and the chieftaincy institution to squeeze the civic space can be seen in the current election campaign, and we already heard a lot from our speaker about this. We know that chiefs are not supposed to be involved in partisan politics, but they've been blessing candidates and showing appreciation in all sorts of ways. I believe that women are some of the greatest losers in this alliance among patriarchal forces, the state, non-state institutions, and the family, to circumscribe their citizenship in the name of culture and religion. There are many lessons we can learn from the life and times of Akoto Ampaw. And the lecture made by Prempe points to one of these, and that's his adaptability and his ability to use different terrains for his lifelong struggle against imperialism and injustice. His activism within the students' movement, within NDM, the workers' movement, in detention, in the courts, and in the NGO world involved different tools, different preoccupations. And it demonstrates the importance of adapting to different terrains, modes, and tools of struggle at our disposal, while being consistent in our commitment to the fight for the most oppressed and marginalized of citizens. The broad range of Akoto Ampaw's lifelong interests is another lesson we can learn. He was interested in the economic fallout of imperialism, the living conditions of the working people, the right to information, keeping the civic spaces open, media freedom, Darfur, Sahrawi Arab Republic, global peace and security. They all point to the power of internationalism and Pan-Africanism, and the importance of avoiding the fragmentation of our struggles, and the value of solidarity in our civic space. His last stand against the anti-LGBTQ coalition is emblematic in this understanding that all our struggles, all struggles involving the most oppressed and marginalized are connected, and they should concern all of us interested in strengthening civic relationships. I was looking at my email records to see what kinds of messages I received from Akoto Ampaw in the last 10 years. I realized that his solidarity with the LGBTQ community did not actually start with the threat of the bill. In response to a message in which someone shared an editorial in Public Agenda, which was titled, "Reject Calls for Homosexual Rights," he wrote, and this was in July 16, 2010. This is really gross and simple. It reflects, I suspect, the Roman Catholic prejudices of the editor, which is paraded around as the time-honored virtues and values of Ghana. If there's one thing we have generally lost as a people, it is our time-honored values and virtues. Everyone fights for himself or herself in the pursuit of material gains. When people start talking about so-called human rights, you know they have no commitment to human rights in general. But it is the call for prosecution of the offense, he puts it in quotes, that is most galling, as it is troubling. Of course, we can expect the religious fundamentalists who are daily threatening to impose their jaundiced views on the rest of us to seize on it and run with it. Questions. So it came to pass 10 years later. In response to another report in the media on Tuesday, 19th July 2011, titled "The Church Must Love Homosexuals but Hate Homosexuality," in which it was reported that the then Secretary of the Association of Charismatic and Christian Churches, Reverend Gideon Titi Ofe, has said that Christians should love homosexuals but hate the act of homosexuality. Sheshe wrote on 20th July 2011, "This is certainly a more balanced and compassionate approach than the drivel we are being fed in the name of Christianity. Fundamentally, it is based on the recognition of the right of choice. I think we should all find occasion to let our views be heard on this matter." It is not surprising, therefore, that he brought together a group of individuals from the human rights and women's movement to challenge the bill when it was unveiled in 2021. Even though at the start the effort looked like a finger in the dike, it turned a mission that looked like a done deal to impose intolerance, terror, and conservative notions of family on an unsuspecting nation into a serious contest between different visions of democracy in Ghana, which soon broadened to include a respectable range of civil society organizations. Even when he was not on the front lines of a struggle, such as the women's movement of Ghana, he paid attention to our issues and encouraged us, spoke on our platforms, and expressed consistent solidarity with our struggles. Sheshe attended some of the early meetings of the Federation of Ghana Women, an effort led by Techua Menu in the early 80s to organize women in Ghana. I still remember him making the point that we need to understand the basis of women's subordination in society to be able to fight it. He clearly was aware of the fact that one of the preoccupations of the global women's movement in that period was to understand the origins of gender inequalities. Sheshe was also the only one of our comrades who consistently sent us his women comrades greetings every 8th March. Looking at my email record, my almighty email record, I saw about 10 years worth of such greetings, a good habit which he no doubt picked from his days as a leading member of the International Students Movement. And while Sheshe was heroic, courageous, consistent, and undoubtedly one of the most influential leaders of an important strand in left politics in Ghana, for whom leadership was not about amassing possessions for self, friends, and family, I think his biggest strength lay in his recognition of the importance of the collective, his unwavering commitment to organization, and his consistency in nurturing and supporting young cadre to continue to fight for a fairer world. To honor his legacy, I think we need to renew our movements with a new generation of Sheshes who can apply these lessons to strengthening civic citizenship. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgie, for bringing up all of those vital dimensions and also adding to our experiences of Sheshe other aspects of his life as a political, social justice activist. The last discussant is Mr. Suleiman Abraima. Mr. Abraima is the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. He obviously is the youngest among the speakers this morning and may also be the one with not a very long experience in relation to working with or associating with Akoto Ampaw. So, and being a young person, we hope you will also remind us old folks what this democracy is all for young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chair, and good morning to everyone. I think it is fair to say that when you have the honor of being invited to speak in the midst of 3 distinguished professors, and you happen to be the last person to be called to speak, perhaps it's fine to simply say thank you so much for inviting me and then taking your seat. Or basically saying, with all that said, I have nothing more useful to add. But given the honor and the privilege of being invited, and of course, sitting through this and listening to the very educative presentation by Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, I cannot but say a few things. I would want to start by saying that my last encounter with Uncle Sheshe, as we used to call him, was in relation to a defamation suit that had been filed against the Fourth Estate, which is a project of the Media Foundation for West Africa. And this suit was in London, far away in London, by a pastor who claimed a report titled Darkness in the Lighthouse, how a non-retired bishop got paid over £300,000 ex gratia. And the bishop had sued us saying, well, we have defamed him for the publication and all of that. So I had to call Uncle Sheshe, and I had to call Professor Kakari to find out whether at long last he was using a mobile phone. Because all along I knew he was not someone who was using a phone. And fortunately at that time I could reach him on the phone. So I called him, and then he said, oh, is that so? Can you send me a brief of this case? You know, a non-legal perspective of the case. So we put together something and sent to him. And then he said, are you sure these are all the facts? We said, yes. He said, but how can somebody institute such a foolish case? But anyway, we have to defend it. So, but it's a difficult one because it's in London, you know. Okay, I'm going to put you in touch with a friend. So send this to him and let's see what happens. Well, to cut a long story short, eventually the matter was settled at the instance of the people who filed the case against us. And in the end, they had to actually bear our legal cost and all of that. So that was my last encounter with Sheshe. And of course, before then, I had the privilege of meeting him on different occasions, the RTI struggles and all of that. So sitting through here, you know, as a young man, I am saying, okay, one day, I mean, everyone will be gone. What would I do so that I would also be remembered the way Sheshe is being remembered? And I think that for me, that has been the reflection. So back to Professor Prempeh's presentation, very educative. And I see it as a complete diagnosis, evaluation, and a prescription for our sick democracy. And a number of things have been raised, including the point he makes about we haven't gotten to a situation of a choiceless duopoly. And many continue to raise this question. Who do I vote for? Oh, I don't like this one, I don't like this one. But if I vote for this one, they won't win. If I choose this, they won't win. And this reminds me of Hassan Ayariga, who is from the Boku area where I come from. And anytime there is a funeral or a gathering of people from that community here in Accra, he uses it as a campaign platform. And he always ends by saying, don't let anyone deceive you that if you vote for me, I won't win. Vote for me to see whether I will win or I will not win. So it's indeed a problematic situation where if you listen to the campaign now, perhaps you would hear more sounds and more music than policies that are being put out, and a lot more promises here and there. Indeed, that is why if you take the biggest problem of Galamsey, which is destroying our environment, destroying our future, both parties are shying away from touching on it. As he said, it's about we don't want to lose votes. And I have friends on both sides who say, what can 3 months do? We are left with just 3 months. You know, how can they destroy the whole thing? After 3 months, after election, we'll make sure everything is restored. Do you know there are about close to 2 million people involved in Galamsey? And I should say it and lose the votes. So I think it's great that Prof. Prempeh brings that up. Then, of course, the point about active citizenship and the issue of voice. And he makes the point about at some point we feel there is voice, but of course the opportunistic use of the voice, where you listen to radio and it's not about the policies that are being analyzed, but it's basically about this is our party and whatever about it is good. That's not our party and whatever about it is a bad thing. And it's quite a difficult situation. For example, at the Media Foundation, every election period we do monitor, you know, commentary in the media, how people are using language and so on and so forth. And we've gotten to a point where the people you name and shame are proud to use your report as their claim to fame. To basically say, look, we are the people fighting for our party, and look, our names are out there. You know, people like Mugabe on Power FM would highlight it and say, oh, the previous one, they said I was #1, now I'm #3, you know, and Wontumi has taken over. So it's an interesting thing. I think that's where we've gotten to where, even though we have a multiplicity of media organizations, it's not about the issues, it's about, you know, insult, attacks, and what people think can help them gain traction within their media ecosystem, within the politics of our country. Then, of course, I work in the media sector, and the media aspects around the media came up. Right now, we have over 700 radio frequencies that have been issued by the NCA, out of which about 600 radio stations are active, more than 100 television channels are active, and of course there are, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of social media platforms that are being used for broadcast, you know, of political sentiments and all of that. I think that the most unfortunate thing is that we've done this over the years since 1994 without any regulation. There's really no regulation to deal with the broadcast sector. And the NMC, the NCA, so far, I think the NMC will basically say, well, there's little that we can do within the space. And the broadcasting bill, the processes have been in the works since, what, the last 2 decades, almost 30 years. And yet frequencies are being given away. I believe that one of the fundamental reasons why FM stations, their coverage had to be reduced to 40-kilometer radius was essentially to be able to get more frequencies to continue the parceling out. So that's another issue that we have to deal with. But what was quite intriguing for me was the issue of trust and how that, as Prof said, may be the reason why people may not be that much active. In other words, if you look at the Afrobarometer data, it shows that trust in Parliament, very low, as Prof said, in the judiciary, getting lower. The presidency, I think, is even the highest in terms of the drop, the police, and all of that. And one would have assumed that if people don't trust the system, then what to do is to maybe begin to react and to act against the system so that you assert yourself and get what is needed. But quite strangely, you know, that appears to be a reason why people are perhaps less active. And then the point about different experiences among different people in terms of the quality of governance and the dividends of governance, that was brought up. And it reminded me about a situation in one of the constituencies in the country where there is an ongoing rehabilitation of, roads within the community, gutters, culverts being built, and so on. And they've chosen to do that predominantly in the area that they feel they have the major support from. Now, the tipper trucks that are working on these construction have to move out and go and get, the soil for the filling and all of that. And then yesterday, somebody calls me to say, well, the areas where the sand and so on are being fetched, the people are saying they won't allow the tipper trucks to come and fetch them because they are not beneficiaries of the construction. And already they were protesting that why are the things being concentrated in a particular area and we are not benefiting? You speak to the people and they say, well, even if we do it for them, they won't vote for us. So we want to consolidate, our votes in the area. So that's certainly another critical issue. And then, of course, Prof highlights the point about the literal collapse of our local governance system. Now we have DCEs, but they will tell you, look, even KVIPs are being awarded from Accra. Even motorbikes for, a few people will be awarded from the ministry in Accra, and then it will be delivered to you, but it will be registered as part of your common fund. So when you look at your common fund allocation, you will see it there, but it's already been utilized to procure certain things for you. So I think the presentation, of course, raises a number of issues for us to ponder about. The redefinition of our democracy, I think that's quite interesting. Government for the party, of the party, and by the party, instead of, the people, for the people, and by the people. And that's the reality. That's where we are now. It's about the the partisans. If MPP is there, the beneficiaries to a large extent are the folks who are within. And that is why, for example, you look at the National Service, the Scholarship Secretariat, and you look at the beneficiaries. Party chairman, the children and relatives of party chairmen, MPs, ministers, and all of that. Then when it is revealed, they say, oh, why? Are they not Ghanaians? Well, but the mechanism is established to benefit needy but brilliant people. But you have somebody who got 3.97 GPA, first class, wanted 4,000, to pay part of his MPhil fees, and was denied. And yet somebody who got a pass has $30,000 to do a master's outside the country. And then you look into it, and it is the son of a regional chairman of the party. Somebody who is, able to buy 300 and something vehicles for the party, has the daughter, getting scholarship to pursue further studies. So, this is a clear illustration of the point that Prof makes about, who benefits from the duopoly that we are in. I think as I was listening, three things came up. The issues of our institutions of democracy, the judiciary, parliament, the executive, the police, and the NCCE, for example. It is the least funded institution in our country, and perhaps the most important if you look at the constitutional responsibilities for the NCCE. But even towards elections, they are struggling. I remember during COVID, a lot of people were saying, oh, what is the NCCE doing? What is the NCCE doing? Then if you speak to them, they will tell you, all our buses, all our cars are broken down. Eventually, they got certain cars allocated to them from the Jubilee House, and after COVID, all those cars were retrieved. I think we need to begin to talk about these critical institutions and the role that they have to play. The other thing, of course, is money. And now money is everything. If you are not positioning yourself in a way to be able to make money, then perhaps you are living in a different country and all of that. But central to all this, I believe, is the whole question of values. As a country, where lies our values? Do we really have values now? And I think without that, it will be difficult to really deal with the challenges that we face. But Prof, of course, ended by saying that, well, he doesn't have solutions, but I think he prescribed quite a few. The first that I want to highlight, the point about allowing citizens to express themselves. And increasingly, if you look at the press freedom rankings and all of that, we are going down, even though people dispute it. Oh, it's not real. They've changed the methodology. That was the narrative from our government people. It's because they've changed their methodology. They've changed it from the previous one. And I said, did they change it only for Ghana? If they changed it globally and other countries are doing well, why do you think that you are a victim of the new methodology? The reality is that freedom of expression is certainly not as it used to be. And I think it is important that, as Prof highlighted, we do that. The reform to political parties, I don't know how we're going to do it though. It's a major thing that has to happen, but I don't know if it is possible, because the structures and the mechanisms that have been put in place is essentially to benefit those who are there, and I don't know if those changes would happen. Reducing monetization in politics, again, I don't know how we can get that done. And then, of course, the issues about the structural reforms to our institution. Now, to end, I just want to say that, in my view, perhaps we started a project called Democracy, a democracy project in 1992. But we did so with a project document that was essentially intended to protect and benefit those who were in power then. And we did so with a document that did not have anything about results metrics, anything about indicators of results, anything about monitoring and evaluation, anything that will guide us to know whether we are making progress or not making progress. And we didn't have anything in there in terms of sustainability. And it appears, even though there was no time frame for this project, it seems to me that if we are not careful, the time for that project to end perhaps is quite close. And therefore, we need to reevaluate the document. That is why people talk about the need to look at the Constitution again, which for me is a project document. The need for us to begin to look at it. And as those who did the review suggested, to move it from a political constitution to a development constitution that benefits everyone. Without that, I believe maybe we'll continue to see a deterioration rather than an improvement of the situation that we find ourselves in. So once again, thank you very much, Prof, for the very erudite presentation and the education, and I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sule. Akunu, can we get some chairs here? No, 3 chairs there from. Oh, here, the ones here. But I have only 1 chair. I don't have 2 chairs. we do to straighten things up, to improve the situation? And that's, well, one of the reasons we are here, to contribute to enlightening ourselves and to see if we can begin to reflect on how to improve our democracy. I think it was Karl Marx who said at one point that the philosophers have interpreted the world. What is left is to change it. All the time, we talk a lot, we discuss a lot. What can we do to change things? We hope this general discussion that you are all going to be involved in will help us understand the situation even more and better, and hopefully we can also come up with some ideas. I think, as the speakers emphasized, Akoto Ampaw's life included, of course, serious intellectual understanding of things, but above all, his activism, I think, was primed on organization. He was always involved in activities that were fostered by organization. He had no qualms about coalition building, bringing different people from different sectors together to pursue causes. And I think that without organization, we can wail, moan, cry, whatever, we are not going to make much progress. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for all of us to discuss the lecture and presentations that we have been privileged this morning to be part of. So we open the discussions, comments, questions, and the panelists, the speakers are here to also respond to questions or help us elaborate and clarify things. So whoever is ready, please, I don't know if there is a microphone there somewhere. Yes. So please, let's hear from you. The floor is open. Yes, we'll take number one. And then who else? Yes, Kojo. Yes, Mr. Akosa. So let's take the first three. Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Professor Kwesi Prempeh and the other speakers. In one of my last conversations with Uncle Shea on this topic of citizenship, one of the things he mentioned was that institutions that emerged out of the struggle that his generation waged for democracy, increasingly these institutions have been captured and are now used in a counterproductive way. For example, institutions that emerged as anti-corruption institutions are now captured and used to protect the corrupt and to persecute those who speak out against corruption and expose corruption. And so for us to restore that, he always talked about how we have to hold these institutions accountable. He also, as Professor Kwame Karikari, you mentioned about these issues being his concern, one of the last ways in which he manifested this was his engagement on the We Be Citizens activism with the rest of you. And I was hoping that in addition to institutionalizing the Akoto Ampaw lecture, we could also find a way to pursue the We Be Citizens campaign because none of the objectives have been achieved. and the issues are getting even more serious. My final point was what Professor George Chikata mentioned about producing more Akoto Ampaws for the struggle to continue. And he himself was a good example of doing that. He invested in a lot of us. I always thought that was his #1 mentee. And then after he died, I was reading stories of many others that he had invested in. So he was a good example. He was not just the only one. There were like Auntie Techiwa and Dr. Graham. They've been very intentional in investing in younger activists. We don't see much of that today, and I think that that would be one great way for us to push that forward. So those will be my contributions. Thank you.
Your name, please.
My name is Maoli Dake. I'm an active citizen.
Yes, here. Kojo, your name. Yes.
Yes, so my name is Kojo Asante. So yeah, thank you. This was a really great lecture, and also thank you for the responses. So one of the things that Akoto Ampaw was very good at was the vigilance, really keeping the space open, because we cannot be active citizens if we cannot have the space, to do what we do. So all the infrastructure and the institutions that allow us to, participate and activate our citizenship have to always be available to us. So the vigilance, always keeping that surveillance and not ceding the space was very important to us. And I think in terms of our solutions, when Sule, you talk about some of the challenges we are having with media, space, and so on, those are some of the things that it's the foundation. As for the civic space, it has to be open, and we have to fight it to whatever. We cannot allow that space to be closed, because once that is closed, then all the other things become very difficult. But the other things, then, it relates to the issue of protest that Professor Prempeh talked about, is that Akoto Ampaw always talked about an outcome, which was institutional reform. So no matter whether we went to march or we organized and so on, at the end we will stay up at night and we will draft, and we would be proposing what legal things we should have to change, what policies have to change, what papers that we have to push, what and I think that we have lost some of that in some of the engagement that we are doing currently. So even with the protests that I've seen recently, as people are complaining about police brutality and issues about bail and so on, we are not having a discussion about how to reform the bail system, how do we reform, the Public Order Act, to make sure that, by the time we are back talking about this, at least those rules have changed around that. And I'm wondering if the speakers can comment a bit about that part of the work of active citizenship that in sort of recent times we are sort of ignoring.
Yeah, I like the idea, Prof, that we need to transition from a party-funded politics into a state-funded one. You see, classical Newtonian physics says that a body is in a state of rest or in a straight line unless impacted. You get in a state of inertia. The duopoly is giving the political class a certain satisfaction that insofar as they could go through 8 yearly cycles, they have game. And politics, which is about money, makes it very difficult for the larger national purpose to be projected. So I believe that if we take over as a society the funding of political parties with appropriate guide rails, I think we may begin to reduce the impact of patronage that infects our body politic so adversely to the ordinary citizen. So I believe that that is one thing that we should take very, very seriously and encourage. Because currently, Mr. Chairman, the political parties, okay, human beings, we respond to incentives. There's absolutely no incentive for any of the political parties to do internal reforms, let alone to project national interest above partisan interest. Because no one of the political parties would like to take a first mover disadvantage. But if we take away that ability to get patronage as a primary source of funding political parties, perhaps we might begin to change the character of our politics. We must see Ghana, like most societies at this level in the 21st century, as waging war against poverty. We are not waging war against NDC or MPP or intertribal groups. The very existence of society revolves around ability to take the modern instruments of development to wage credible war against poverty that affects so many of our people. When a society is invaded by an external party, the invader doesn't know MPP or NDC. All the invader knows is that they are taking over your country. So when you are trying to protect your territorial integrity, you come together in a coalition to defend the enemy. Our politics must be waged to defeat poverty. They are not doing that. And I believe the professor's example of state-funded politics might be one of the many ways that we can get out of this quagmire. Thank you.
Please, there is Professor Akoto Admako online asking questions. So we'll hear her. And then the gentleman back there is one of the people in the audience outside. So after Professor Admako, the gentleman will also
and it's a citizen activist also with the Democracy Hub or Fix the Country. My question was actually targeted at the Attorney General who was here to have kind of given some response to if the protocols was to allow, but obviously I'll throw it down to the panel. How are we looking at collectively working to reverse some of the injustices that happen from protests, for instance, even though we may not have been directly involved, but there are big organizations in here that can voice out or demonstrate solidarity post protests and the skirmishes that come out from that. Particular references of colleagues who are still going to court because of the charges that were leveled against them. And then the other one is to the project, the Constitution, the 1992 Constitution project that we're all looking at, and the consequence, the negative consequence that we're talking about. What are some of the practical measures we're looking at towards revising these very provisions that are troubling us? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So whoever wants to start, please, you want to start off? Who wants to start first? Okay, so no, I think there are. There isn't any silver bullet, of course, but I think when you look at a lot of people immediately just have recourse to constitutional reform or constitutional review. It's become very chic to say, okay, let's do this constitutional reform thing. I mean, the more I've looked at it, and I'm a lawyer, I enjoy this constitutional stuff, but I don't know that. That's really where the this wholesale review is where the solution lies. Some micro reforms of some particular provisions and features of our constitution absolutely necessary. Like I mentioned, local government. The problem with our constitution, as I see it, is extremely permissive, and I do not know if its timing with neoliberal market reforms has anything to do with. I haven't seen. There are very few permissive constitutions like that. Almost, it's not regulatory enough. So once you give power, the person to whom you give power just gets to use it anyhow. When you look at the Kenyan constitution, in contrast, the 2010 constitution, and that's telling. They had a constitutional transitional process, and then they realized, and then this big implosion happened after the 2008 elections, which almost led to civil war. So they went back and sat at the table and put everything on the table. Of course, you can't produce a perfect constitution. You cannot. Some legacies will remain. But I think it's probably the most courageous effort yet. Within the liberal paradigm, right, to fashion out a constitution that responds to particular problems in a particular society. So they've devolved power from the center to 47 or so counties. There are only two layers of government, the center and the county level. The county has substantial autonomy to chart their development path, lots of money. They raise their own taxes. They do a lot of things at the local level. Block grants do go from the center, but the local people control a lot of what happens there. And it is actually producing some results at the local level. Some of the things that we faced, so low trust in institutions was a big problem in Kenya. And when you look at the judiciary now, how you do these things matter. If you choose your judges through open recruitment, recruitment, positions are advertised. Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, they are all advertised. The criteria is there. You apply to an independent body, transparent, not controlled by the executive or by parliament. And they hold interviews publicly. And then they choose. And the president is obligated to appoint them. It's just a duty to appoint, not the power to appoint. You just have to appoint them once they have been selected and parliament has vetted them and all of that. Now you're going to produce a different kind of judiciary than what we have. So how you constitute these bodies matter. right? How you are going to get a radically different judiciary from the kind of judiciary that we have. And I suspect that the levels of trust that we have in our judiciary now, for example, will edge up a bit if indeed the ways in which they were constituted in terms of choice. Beyond the Supreme Court level, you don't even have any process at all. You just announce, somebody made a high court judge, no process. Black box, opaque, nobody knows how they became a high court judge. So there are all these, I think some things can be done, to even things like IGP. How are we getting the type of policing we are getting? Well, because, they serve at the pleasure of the president, right? Very, human nature. They have no tenure. Not that the Kenyans have it perfect, but even their IGP has constitutional tenure that he can only be removed for stated reasons. Once you appoint him, he goes through a vetting process. Parliament has to approve. Some small oversight, this kind of blanket license a president has in Ghana to do all manner of things, right, is just not conducive to good governance. And I think our constitution has become this Wild West, just like the economy. The Wild West constitution where anything goes, pretty much anything goes. And that level of permissiveness, I think, is dangerous, right? So we need a more regulatory constitution. It gives power, but then it turns around and caps it and puts a lot of guardrails there. The Kenyans, for example, can change the constitution as citizens, right? Ours, only the political class are gatekeepers. If we can't, there's a problem with the constitution now, you can't fix it. A lot of the things we are talking about might require some constitutional tinkering. The parties in parliament are the gatekeepers with the president of any reform process at all. Our constitution doesn't allow citizen initiative, which the Kenyans allow. So we have boxed ourselves in, right? In a way, constitutional reform, the reason why I no longer spend a lot of energy in that direction is that it's really going to be very difficult, right? And you don't even know that the outcomes may be progressive. You can actually get very regressive outcomes from some of these enterprises. So while I think we still must do something about the constitution, we should do it very carefully and with a lot of circumspection, because we can never quite tell how it goes. I agree with Akosa on the parties. I think that we can do something about. We don't have to go into the constitution to do that. The constitution has some very basic language. In internal affairs of political parties shall conform to democratic principles. If you have a progressive judiciary, they can expand on that. That could be a good entry point to make a lot of reforms in our political parties. They are not in the constitution for nothing. They are the only, so they are not, when you talk to the partisans and parties, they think that this is a private club. Once we invited political parties to a meeting to talk about campaign finance, but you don't give us any money. So why do you worry about where we get our money? Right? But of course, a state is a state. It can regulate your affairs whether or not we give you money. We regulate a lot of people who we don't give any money to. But I do think the reason I'm saying, and it's not just state funding, it's actually almost state takeover. I think that we need to basically take the parties. Yes, you can join whatever party you like, but this kind of party that can do whatever they like, really do whatever they like in this system. Campaign however they like, openly, buy TV, give money, absolutely not acceptable. There is no way we should allow this kind of stuff to go on, or even especially openly. Once we give them some money, I'm not saying just give them and let them go. You regulate everything they do. They don't even they can't put billboards there, right? You regulate the location, the time, how long it must stay, the campaign period, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or 5 weeks. You bring NCC in to hold town hall meetings and platforms. It is a public institution. You regulate it as a public institution because it is actually. This is how we are recruiting our political leadership. And how are we going to allow this kind of system where they can pick anybody, any background. And then you just get up and you are in parliament the next day and you are making laws and all of that. And I think this laissez-faire thing that we have transferred from the economy into politics is going to be our doom. We have to be a regulatory state. The state has to come back into the picture in a significant way and regulate these kinds of channels, because otherwise we really are risking a disaster. The parties are,
The Galamsey stuff is the eye opener. It's clear that if we let these parties have their way, nothing bad that needs to be undone in this country will ever be undone. Because there's always a cost to a policy change. There will be losers and winners. To every policy change, there's a winner and a loser. And if they think that they are losers, they are not going to do anything about it. And that's why a lot of problems actually fester. A lot of problems fester because the parties think, we are going to lose from this marginal change. Why should we do it? You know? So it's not a technical problem of they not knowing. It's a political problem that the incentives are misaligned. They will never do it if it will cost them. So that's why they won't bring the debt issue. They won't bring IMF up to discussion. Neither party will do it, right? The only way I foresee the politics, and it's a very dicey one, because they take turns in power, I think there's an incentive that, 8 years is not bad. If one party stays away for, let's say, 20, the danger, though, is that they will have no incentive to keep the peace. I think the peace has kept here because somehow, given the bad dysfunctional equilibrium we are in, somehow we still move power left and right. Until we get to a different level of equilibrium, maybe that is what sustains the peace. But I think that basically if one side was shut out, then they would either be doing revolution to change the whole system, or they will collapse the whole thing, right? And we don't want to get there. So I think that there has to be some elite consensus. I mean, Dr. Kewa Amwakon had this idea of this compact for Ghana, coming from ESET, civil society joined him, trying to engineer a certain consensus around some very fundamental reforms that we need to get the system going, and that it will be in the enlightened interest of the same elites, actually, to come on board with some of these ideas so that we can fix these problems. But if they think that they can just circle around and win power the way, one of these days, it's not going to go that way again. So for me, I think that it's a bigger issue. It's not necessarily piecemeal, but campaign finance is something I think we need to start. We can do it without the Constitution. So we need to worry about. I think we should do it. I think electing MMDCs, we should do it, with or without parties. In many places in the US and other places, they don't even, mayors are non-party, right? So I used to be for pure party. Now I'm very much anti-party. In fact, I actually believe that we can have a non-party presidential system, right? And I've written about it, where we allow parties only to compete for legislative elections, but not presidential elections. That they don't even supply candidates. I think we are at a point where we need to basically customize this constitution to suit the realities that we are facing. A presidential candidate chosen by a party is going to continue to serve the party's interest in our system. Meanwhile, we are seeing them as father of the nation, mother, whatever, right? So these are supposed to be national the moment you elect them, right? But they don't operate that way, right? I met the former president of Costa Rica just, we're in Hamburg like 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me about when he was a president. In their system, it's only one term. You come one term and you go. You can come back after you stayed out for 2 terms. The logic of it is that incumbency, they don't want you to use incumbency to entrench yourself, because incumbency is what gives you the advantage. So you can come back after you've gone out for 2 terms with no incumbency, you can come back. But something he told me was interesting. The moment he's elected, he's not allowed to he can't do party rallies, he cannot attend any party thing, he's not a party person anymore. The state owns you. You serve the people, not your party, right? So they have thought through certain things and figured out that, no, if we allow presidents to behave this way, it's not going to work. We are at a point now where we need to do something radical about this party stuff. Because otherwise, that is really, for me, that is where the crux of the matter is. It's really going to collapse this place if we don't do something about it. It's not indigenous to our culture. If there's one thing about democracy I can do away with, it's party. It's not that I like a champions union government system, but there's something about parties we can play with. They have a role, they can aggregate interest, but parliament is where you do that. You can aggregate interest in parliament. You can't aggregate interest within one person. The president is just one person. I mean, what kind of aggregation of interest are we talking about? So we can have a president who has no allegiance to any party, chooses a cabinet from whatever, runs the country,
accountable to Parliament still. Parties can go there and hold the person accountable. I mean, we can think through all of that implication. But the party is a big problem. And I think we really need to come to terms with it and begin to innovate around the problem and find a way that suits us and works for us. I mean, I really have a problem with the way the parties are going now. Our time is very, very stuck now. So we'd like Georgie and Sule, maybe we should take 2 more questions or contributions, and then you can wind up for us. So somebody had a hand up. Yes, number 1. 2 there. We'll make a concession. 3 there and 4. So 1, 2, 3. The lady there, number 3, and then number 4. Yes. But mention your name, please.
Thank you, Prof. My name is Samson Ladi. And thank you very much, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, for that insightful presentation. This democracy, I just put this down so I can keep to your time. This democracy, as you have observed, is hijacked by the duopoly. They are effective at muting genuine citizen voice for correction and for change. It's a real danger that must not be perpetuated. That's why I'm excited at stoking what eventually doused the fire for partisan leadership at a local level. I just heard you say you're okay with it, whether it is partisan or it's not. You've spoken about the cost involved in the partisanship and how it's been very unhealthy. Now, upwards of 75% will vote because they do it in secret. Only 5% will show up for a protest because they feel endangered. What will you tell citizens who think they may be risking just too much in showing voice and face?
Thank you, guys. And thank you all the members and organizers of this. I'm a student here working on my master's. I'm from New York City. I'm majoring in African studies with a concentration in international economics. And I just appreciate all the content, you know, in terms of the information you've shared. I feel like all of you have mentioned this in some way or another, that it's the trust that people have or don't have, rather, of politicians, the public disillusionment by government in voting, the duopoly, which is, I think most democratic systems use a duopoly, but in some way, shape, or form, like in the States, there's a libertarian or a green party, a little higher. That's what you're saying? Okay, can y'all hear me? Oh, wow, that's really loud. Okay. How y'all doing? Okay. But in the States, there's a green party. There's obviously Republican and Democrat, but there's a green party who was run by one of the Kennedy brothers recently, but it's always just for show, not necessarily for an actual like voting party. There's ethnography in voting as well, and there needs to be a revolution there. There's severe partisanship, as you mentioned. The voice of the people is through protest, but not many want to. Many feel, again, disillusioned by the entire like governmental system. They don't think it's effective or accurate, and most of it is not a representation of them. You know, Africa has one of the youngest populations, but a lot of politicians, like the States, are like in their 80s and like just incredibly unrepresentative of the youth. Again, the voting process is usually too long. It needs to be minimized, so there's less campaign time. The cost of campaigning is really only for the extremely wealthy or connected. I'm a little nervous. That's why I'm kind of choking up a little bit. But I'm extremely grateful to be here and to be a part of this. You know, my class have been paused because of the strike that's going on, and I came all this way. And so I'm just very anxious to learn, but I feel like that also plays a part in the democracy here. I guess what I'm saying is, what do you think is one of the most important first steps? We always have these like really lofty ideas, but miss some kind of practicality often. So I would love to hear from all of you. What do you think are the first steps to move forward? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Vera Abinado. Um, I'm happy that this conversation is happening on university campus. And I'm sure most of you also know how now protests on many university campus is not happening because of the response of the university community. And I would like to say that we need support of the older generation. I think that sometimes the older generation is too critical of young people. You criticize us so much about our approach, the way we do things, our way of protest. We also have to recognize that a lot of things have changed and we do things differently. We may not do it like you do it. And you also agree that we are not even doing half of how most of you were doing on various campuses. You were very active on campuses and you were very active in a conversation at the national level as well. And it's also because there's that gap. We do not communicate, we do not talk. And when we go wrong, it's more about chastising us and criticizing and not having a conversation. Even if we do not come to you, that is how it is expected that we come and have a conversation, even if you are not coming. I think that as elders of the, as elders of the community or town or the country, we expect some proactiveness also from older generation for us to have a conversation, because you see how we behave. A lot of things are happening, even economically, financially. We are already stressed and hustling, and we are trying to survive as young people. And so we do things a little bit more different from the way older generation usually would do. And so we think that we need this conversation to go on more and more. And pardon us also. I would say you should pardon us also. And the way we do things, it may not be the way you like it, that we should go out and be on the street and do it some way or the other way. Especially even for young women, you're on the street and people are wondering, why are you there? And when you think about protests, it's more about the boys. And when they say youth, they eliminate the young women and think that you are talking about youth, and it is the young ones who are rowdy and doing other things. So I think that maybe this should be a beginning, a conversation about how an opportunity for us to groom and mentor and have this conversation about your expectations. But you shouldn't also expect us to do exactly what you expect us to. Allow us to make our own mistakes. Allow us to protest in our own way to contribute to the national conversation and dialogue. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, and that's very well stated. So we come to our speakers. So yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all the comments. So I want to start by maybe with just something that happened when we discussed and finally established the Fourth Estate as an investigative journalism project within the Media Foundation for West Africa. There were perhaps the majority of colleagues in the office who were not comfortable, and not comfortable on the basis of maybe policy or institutional mechanism and so on and so forth, but that this was going to raise a lot of security issues, safety issues for colleagues, staff, and even for the organization. And so at one meeting I had to say, but I thought we have been going around training journalists. And what have we been training them to do? We train them and we say we want them to do enterprising journalism, we want them to do critical journalism, investigative journalism, and so on and so forth. So are we saying we are okay to go and train people to do what we don't want to do? And I'm saying that to say that perhaps we are at a time where maybe a lot more sensitization, engagement about, as I said, the values of life. What do people really stand for? And I think it is critical. Without that, Right here, I can say Professor Kakari went to prison for activism. Zagozie Duamankwa went to prison. I'm not just citing a scenario. I'm saying what happened. So he's been to prison before. Sedua Mankwa has been to prison before. I saw Dr. Agraham here, who has been to prison before. At a time that perhaps it was much more riskier to be an activist than we find ourselves today. You know, but they did because they had certain principles that they thought were valuable and they needed to pursue them. But today, we've lost it. It's all about what would I do to get money quick. You know, it's about money. So the religious community, the pastors, the reverend ministers that we look up to, is all about money. It's about how many VAs they have. It's about what cars they have. You go to the Muslim sector, it's the same thing. Our chiefs is the same. Galamsey is going on, and in many places the chiefs are aware. If you talk to some of the Galamsey people, they will tell you, oh, when the police and the security people are coming, they will first reach out to the chief, and then they will let us know that tomorrow they will be coming, we shouldn't go. That's what is happening. So, and then you talk about the media and journalism is the same, because they will ask you, Charlie, everybody is making money, me that I have to sacrifice for the country. So it's getting to a point where people would say, oh, are you the only one who will make Ghana what it should be? And all of that. So for me, it's about how do we begin a movement that would build a cohort of people who have certain values and say, look, we think this is right, this is wrong, and the wrong things, we would stand up against them no matter what the consequences may be. Otherwise, the way things are going, people go to politics not for any values. It's about money. That is what it is. And that is why we have 137, and people would say, oh, there will be a lot of checks. But I think this particular parliament of the last 4 years perhaps has been the most, I don't know what word to use. It has been. It's borrowed more than, it has supported borrowing more than anything. You know, it is the parliament that has passed this law about LGBTQ and so on. A lot of sensationalism, emotional outbursts, and so on and so forth has happened. And then you would have assumed that if we have 137, just one independent, and it was about values, it's about the development of this country and so on, if the government is doing something that is wrong, it won't happen. Today we are being told that, oh, if now that the majority-minority thing is that way, we are going to repeal e-levy, we are going to do this, we are going to, and I'm like, so is it that just the one person difference is what had prevented you all this while from repealing e-levy and so on and so forth? It's all about populism. It's all about money and so on. So for me, it's all down to values. Can we have people who will stand up for values? This is an academic institution. I think when we were young, the kind of things that we read from Legon professors, today we are not reading the same things. And that's the reality. You know, the kind of activism people will say, oh, during the champion days, we used to demonstrate, we used to do that, we used to do that. Fairly easy to do that now, but why is it not happening? They say even demonstrations, students cannot demonstrate. Why? I mean, why? And we have to confront the authorities, the powers that be in our universities to say why. Why should that be? So we are grooming docile students. They come out and they cannot stand up and do anything because, well, power from above is saying, don't allow the students to do this. So I think that, as I said, it's about the values and making sure that people stand up for something. Even if that means they will go to prison. Even if that, elsewhere people die for certain things. In any case, you will die one day. As they say, all die be die.
So much has been said, so I'll be very brief. So I agree that we need a new breed of activists and politicians who have values. But I also believe strongly that values are not created in a vacuum. Why is it that the kinds of selflessness that we are all praising Akoto Ampaw and his comrades for has always been a minority strain in our politics? I think it has to do with the deep structures of our society, our economy, and our politics, and we can't separate them. We've all embraced rampant neoliberalism in the economy. how can a market economy, which everybody believes that the market is God, produce a democracy which is meaningful? It is not surprising that we are complaining about our democracy. This is a crisis of liberal democracy. We can see it in our institutions, we can see it in the civic space, we can see it in the shallowness of what we mean by democracy. We spent a lot of time talking about elections, and yet that's a very tiny bit of what our democracy and democratic space means. So I strongly believe that we have to look at our neoliberalism. It is creating a lack of a future for our society. The young people are desperate. How can we be preaching to them that will have good values? We can't. And this is why the 419 people are very successful with our young people, and the priests are very successful with them, because there are actually no proper opportunities for progression. So we have to pay attention to that. How can we change this neoliberal stranglehold on our society and our politics? That's one. Secondly, I wanted to say that financing elections, funding political parties, and so on, they are all an important part of the weaknesses we suffer. But it's almost like putting the cart before the horse until we change the rules of the game. And this is why I talked about the idea of moving to proportional representation. There are many things to be said for proportional representation. It allows small parties to have a say in the political system. We keep on complaining about this duopoly. We are not going to get rid of it, even if we finance political parties, unless we change the rules of the game. If it's proportional representation, regional parties can also have a space. Small parties that represent people with disability will have a space. Parties that are concerned about the environment will have a space in our system. And secondly, everybody's vote will begin to count more than it used to. Now, this is not a perfect system. We can fashion it in a way that suits us. But the principle of proportionality is so important, so that we don't have a situation where in a constituency you can lose your voice by one vote. Because that definitely is not, it's not democratic. So by all means, let's talk about how to finance our elections. But we should really think of these far-reaching reforms that change the political system. And it is linked with also thinking about an economy that works better for everyone. And it definitely cannot be an economy in which the state is a night watchman. How can the state be proactive in the way we want it to be? We're talking about our constitution. That's a neoliberal constitution. And Kenya's constitution is precisely the developmental constitution that we need. And it's even at odds with Kenya's rampant neoliberalism anyway. So it has tensions. But there should be a congruence amongst our economic systems, our political systems, and our social systems. And I think that's vital. 3 people talked about intergenerational politics, and I think this is a really important thing for keeping civic space open. Why are we talking about civic space in any case? We want all generations, all social groups, no matter who you are, to have a purchase in the space. So if you have a space where us, the elite, are able to talk, sometimes I say that some of the things we are so grateful to Sheshe for, he may not have been able to, if he was not a member of the elite. So it's very important to understand that when we think of the civic space, it's not a space in which we can continue making speeches and pontificating. It is a space where people with no power, no purchase on the system and so on, can enter into that space. And that's why young people are very important in this respect. And I like the young woman who said, times have changed, we will not be doing politics the way you people did it. What this says to me is that our institutions, our organizations must be intergenerational. And indeed, many of them are. CDD has a lot of young people, NetRight, whoever. You begin to see the beginnings of this intergenerational dialogue. But it has to become more deliberate. And we have to show solidarity to young people. In other societies, they are mothers of the disappeared, for example. They are a powerful force. because they come to the political space as political mothers. They say that our children are being oppressed, they've disappeared. Some of these kinds of movements are solidarity movements which have bridged generational gaps. So I think we could think of some of those things, because in the end, that's the only way we can create more of the sheshes that we are looking for. Thank you very much.
So let me end with, since we're on the university campus, I think the point was, you raised it. I think Abna Vera also raised it. I think the role of the university, especially the public university, in the reproduction of the kind of elite we're seeing in our politics is a very under-discussed and understudied issue. Increasingly, the university spaces have become probably one of the most, it's almost a paradox, right? So they're getting more illiberal, more authoritarian in terms of students' freedoms. You can't protest in a university, completely silly idea. But here is also where the parties have free rein to come and essentially poach, indoctrinate, run campaigns. SRC campaigns have become like testing grounds for national, elections and stuff like that. And the university administration that is telling you can't protest on the university campus is the same university administration that is allowing parties to come here and basically turn these places into political party fiefdoms. I think, basically one of the things we can test, this is a small laboratory, right? We can pilot some of the reforms we want to do with political parties on a university campus. Some of the regulatory things we should do with parties. There's nothing I know in any law that says university administration cannot tell parties, you don't come to our grounds, you cannot sponsor candidates in our elections. You cannot, elections of SRC will take place this way. You can't do a poster this big. You can't do that big. You can't do a rally here. We should begin to regulate some of these spaces, right? And we should not allow university administration to hand over the university campuses to political parties, but tell students you cannot demonstrate, right? I mean, they are reproducing, like you are saying, they are reproducing not just docile, they are reproducing partisans. That's what they are doing here. They are allowing them to reproduce partisans instead of patriots, instead of civic-minded people who are actually going to go into leadership. This is where all of it is happening. So to the extent that we are here, I think the universities must begin to sit up and stop being part of this game of reproducing this kind of predatory elites that we are getting in our politics. Kwesi, Georgie, and Sule, thank you very, very much. I think we've been treated to some very enlightening discussions this morning. And all the questions and contributions here have also been very, very complementary to the lectures. Let me just give you one small example of the role of the university authorities and the kind of politics we were doing in the 70s, 80s. Somebody said that myself and some other comrades went to prison. On the night of, I think, 16th or something May 1987, around 2 a.m., a platoon of armed soldiers, BNI officers and so on, came to my bungalow in Little Legon there, woke me, my family up, and took me with handcuffs to detention. So when they came, I said, officers, please, I live here on somebody's land. So can you help me, take me to my landlord to tell my landlord that you are taking me away? They said, who is your landlord? And I said, the Vice Chancellor. The Vice Chancellor was Professor Akilakpa Sawyer. So they obliged. So they drove me to Professor Akilakpa Sawyer's house on top of the hill. We woke him up around 2 something. He was in his pajamas. He came, what's going on? And I said, well, they say they are taking me away. They are taking you where? I said, I don't know. So I thought you should know. And maybe take the name of the commander. So I told him, and then we went away. Unknown to me, this was 2 a.m. At 7 a.m., Akila Kwasoya runs to Professor Kwame Ninsing, who was then the president of the University Teachers Association, and said, look, they have come for so-and-so. So you and your organization, do something about it. So Kwame Ninsing and his group, the executives of UTAG, rushed to the bungalow of the then Secretary for Education, Abdallah, to warn him that if you don't bring him back, the lecturers too will join the student strike. The point I'm making is that that was a different kind of university leadership. I'm sure that if it happened today, the university authorities would say, hey, take the trouble away from us. But this is a very, very serious problem that I don't think we should allow to continue. What are universities for if it is not for developing critical minds of the youth in the society? Thank you very much. The young lady there who reminded us of the need for intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational inspiration, and so on and so forth. But also spare us some of the criticism. Precisely because we are not your generation, we also may not know how to mobilize you. You see, we must admit that. The thing, for instance, this thing here, a lot of times I ask my grandchild to do it for me. You see, so you too must be patient with us. But Akoto Ampaw, whenever we wanted to decide on some risky something, and somebody came up with some cautionary thing, Akoto Ampaw would say, hey, this is common fear. This is just common fear. There is nothing else. So remove the common fear from your mind, you know. Thank you all very much, and we hope to continue. Don't let us wait for an anniversary. I think this forum, we should find ways of raising this forum now and again. CDD, Media Foundation, and all of us here. Let's continue the dialogue. Let's continue the discussions and see how well we can promote freedom and democracy in our country. Thank you very much. Yes, there are